Chapter 1004. The light of divine power surrounded the great shrine. At the same time, all the shrines in the material plane that served Soren had a faint golden light. This was the power of faith that Soren was extracting from the entire church. Even for a god, it was not easy to create a new advanced profession. The ability that Soren wanted to give to the new profession determined how much divine power he needed to consume. Moreover, these advanced professions were often unable to make ends meet. If Soren cultivated too many of them, he might need to consume more divine power. Therefore, Soren needed to set a limit. He had to raise the threshold of the advanced arcane assassin to ensure that every advanced arcane assassin was an excellent rogue. The arcane assassin's dexterity cannot be too low. The required dexterity should be around 22 points. If you want to obtain the ability of divine arts and arcane, then your perception should not be too low. Accompanied by the golden light of divine power, Soren calculated the minimum perception requirement for the arcane assassin. If you want to advance to the arcane assassin, your dexterity must not be lower than 22 points, and your perception must not be lower than 14 points. This was the minimum requirement for a priest. As for other attributes, there were no mandatory requirements for the arcane assassin. However, the higher your perception, the more shadow divine arts you could use. At the same time, Soren also provided more shadow damage for the arcane assassin. When using Shadow Strike, the bonus from perception could add additional shadow damage. Next, Soren began to set the equipment restrictions for the arcane assassin. In order to reduce the consumption of divine power, the arcane assassin must only wear leather armor. Soren could not give them the ability of a rogue swordsman. Next, the preferred weapon was a dagger. Those who used a scimitar would need an additional ability. Dual wielding was a must. Almost all the rogues who believed in Soren had the potential to be a battle thief. Dual wielding was an additional ability. Finally, there was the more important part. This was the part where Soren consumed the most divine power. He set the legendary ability of the arcane assassin. Basically, all special advanced classes had the unique power of the legendary level. For example, the Storm Lord could summon lightning, the ascetic could be immune to elemental damage, and the weapon master could choose his own weapon. The arcane assassins that Soren created had to be given the corresponding legendary abilities. Otherwise, they would only be a normal high-tier class. On the other hand, Soren's goal was for the arcane assassin's final form to be an advanced legendary tier character, possessing abilities that would not be inferior to any other legendary tier character class. Rogue level 5, Assassin level 5, Crafty Assassin level 10. The normal template is level 20. Without taking into account the part-time jobs, there should be a unique legendary ability. Soren thought for a while and waved his hand. The light of divinity shrouded the temple, and at the same time he drew power from his divinity of shadow, and murmured, "The power before legendary comes from the divinity of wanderer, which gives extra bonuses to the profession. Then after becoming a legend, I should be able to use the power of the shadow, priesthood. For my first legendary ability, I'll choose the direction of bloodline strengthening. I've decided on you. Transformation into a shadow being." Soren controlled the power of the shadows, so the first legendary ability he gave to the arcane assassin was transformation into a shadow being. This was a very powerful ability. Through rituals and special items, one could turn into a shadow being, retaining the most basic characteristics of a human. They needed to eat and rest, but they did not have any fatal weaknesses. Their body was transformed into a semi-energy state. The biggest advantage of transforming into a shadow being was that they could be resurrected. Not only could they be resurrected through divine spells, but they could also store their life source somewhere in the shadow plane. After their physical body died, their body would automatically draw the materials prepared in advance to complete the resurrection. In other words, they could reconstruct a semi-energy body. This ability had appeared in some of the top shadow assassins before. At the same time, Soren gave the arcane assassin additional shadow abilities after transforming into a shadow being, strengthening their stealth ability, and giving them the special arcane skill to merge themselves into the shadows. For the second legendary ability, I'll choose Shadow Assassin. Soren thought for a while and gave the arcane assassin a high-grade divine spell as an additional reward. This divine spell was a level 8 divine spell. It could use one's own shadow as a medium to summon a shadow assassin with 60% of one's strength. It was similar to Mirror Image and Simulacrum, but the effect was slightly weaker. This was an additional divine spell, and casting it would consume Soren's divine power. Currently, he only planned to give this divine spell to the rogues who believed in him. The arcane assassin transformed from an outsider would definitely not be the same as the arcane assassin transformed from his believers. This ability was considered a gift from God. As for killing and death, I can't give it to them yet. The core of Soren's divine domain was still in the shadow plane. With his strength as an intermediate god, he could only give them 2 additional legendary abilities at most. However, the profession of the arcane assassin was created by him. After Soren's own strength was strengthened, he could still give them additional abilities. Creating a profession could not be done casually. Although Soren could directly give the arcane assassin a level 1 to 9 divine spell, doing so was basically equivalent to creating a chosen. The burden of divine power would be very terrible. Soren could only choose one of the abilities as an additional gift to reduce his own consumption of divine power, along with the spread of a golden light. The arcane assassin created by Soren was officially formed, and with the glory of the temple, most of the devout believers learned about the arcane assassin. However, if they wanted to advance, they had to go to the Great Temple of Mordor. At present, only the Great Temple of Mordor could complete the transformation ceremony of the arcane assassin. This was too long, and Soren needed to give the shadow blessing. It took almost a day or two. Soren's Great Temple ushered in the first batch of rogues transformed into the arcane assassin. They were originally advanced assassins because there were not many choices for the rogue profession. There were only 2 legendary professions that they were most likely to advance into. One was the arcane assassin, which was the ability of a part-time mage, but it required high intelligence. The other was the shadow master, which was very scary. The birth of the arcane assassin was tantamount to lowering the threshold of the legendary profession. At the same time, it also greatly improved their ability, allowing these people to mobilize more shadow energy. In just 3 or 4 days, the number of people in Mordor City who had transformed into the arcane assassin had reached 100 or 200, and this number was still increasing. At the same time, good news came from Sigil City. Inside the tower, Soren's figure appeared at the top of the arcane tower. During this time, he was busy dealing with the transformation ceremony of the arcane assassin. At the same time, he observed whether there were any shortcomings and obvious weaknesses of the profession he created. These needed to be determined through actual combat. "You're here." Gloria's figure stood in front of the crystal ball. After Soren appeared, she turned around and smiled. "Look at this. Mother recently found this in Sigil City. It can be sent back in about a day or 2. A huge steel machine appeared in front of Soren's eyes. He walked to the crystal ball and took a look. He wondered, "What is this?" Gloria explained, "This is a magic steel furnace. The demand for steel in the arcane era is very high. This huge demand can't be met by the backward steel forging methods alone. What you see in front of you is a furnace used to forge magic steel ingots. There are bigger things outside. This is a set of small steel forging furnaces from the arcane era. It can meet all the requirements of a small floating city. As long as iron ore is put in to smelt, the initial refining can be completed. The later part can be done by golems. The output is not yet clear, but it will definitely be far more than the current Mordor city." Wasn't this a small automatic steelmaking factory? Soren looked at the rune lines on the huge steel instrument in front of him. It was densely packed like a circuit board. He couldn't help but sigh at the wisdom of the arcane civilization. "It's quite troublesome to transport this thing back, isn't it?" Soren said. Gloria nodded and said, "First take it apart and then transport it back in batches. Mother has already made contact with the surviving arcanists in Sigil City. Their situation doesn't seem to be very good. These are all exchanged with soul crystals. For arcanists, gold coins were not of much significance. They only cared about those precious resources." By the way, Gloria seemed to think of something. She mysteriously handed a scroll to Soren and said, "This is the information collected in Mother's tavern. It comes from an astral explorer who has been wandering for hundreds of years." Astral explorer. These were some legendary creatures wandering in the astral world. They were all very powerful creatures. "What is this?" Soren took it in confusion, opened it and looked at it. Then his expression was a little surprised. "Really?" Gloria nodded and said, "It should be true. Mother also spent a lot of money to exchange for this information. It recorded the trajectory of a small diamond meteorite. The astral explorer personally boarded this meteorite about 1 kilometer in diameter. The surface of this meteorite has been crystallized. Its interior should have been transformed into a diamond form because of the elemental reaction. The astral explorer left a space waymark on it, but for some reason he couldn't take it away with his own ability, so it was best to sell its location at a high price. Diamond asteroid. In the boundless multiverse, some asteroids would directly transform into diamonds for some reason. Its density and mass would greatly increase. This was one of the most valuable treasures in the astral world. Even the gods could not ignore it. However, a diamond asteroid with a diameter of 1 kilometer, even Soren was not sure if he could bring it back. Chapter 1005. In about 2 days, the Fallen which sent back the parts of the steel furnace. The core of the whole huge machine was a rune stone, which was like a central processing system. There was a huge rune engraving operation in it, which was responsible for the normal work of the whole machine. Although the arcane civilization did not have a huge computer, it had advanced artificial intelligence like Thaling. To some extent, the two civilizations had similarities. Soren was not an expert in this area, but Gloria and the Fallen which were very familiar with it. Especially Gloria, who had recently begun to study some of the mysteries of the magic network. If she succeeded, she might be able to further master the true meaning of the mage clergy. At the same time, the army of Mordor began to move to the south coast. After all, the number of the undead army was still too large. Soren had to secretly help the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, so he issued a contract against the undead, in the name of the Lord of Mordor, the Lord of Shadows and the true God of Rogues. The contract said that under the threat of the undead, they should temporarily put aside the hatred of the past. Even if there was hatred, it had to wait until the undead were dealt with. On the surface, they temporarily resolved the hostile relationship with the Principality of Rossard. Others could only guess that the Duke of Red Dragon's wife had found a way to ease the relationship with Soren, but they would never think that the Duke of Red Dragon's wife had given up the demons and turned to Soren. The world was so realistic. Although the demons were powerful, their strength was limited in the material plane. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife did not hesitate to betray them in a desperate situation. Soren was not a naive child. The struggle of the gods was full of conspiracy and betrayal. He knew very well that if he did not have enough strength, even the Maiden of Pain would secretly betray him, let alone the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Soren was now at the peak of his power because he was strong enough and he was still getting stronger. As long as he could ensure the growth of his power, these people would be more loyal than expected. Soren would not personally participate in the battle against the undead. At most, Soren would deal with enemies above Demigod Lich, and with the current situation of Mordor City, he also needed a group of loyal people to die in battle. That's right. Soren needed them to die honorably as warriors. The army of Mordor was huge and there was a steady flow of reinforcements. For Soren, Mordor was about to undergo a military transformation. As it turned out, there were simply too many pirate warriors. Soren needed more disciplined civilian warriors, so it would be best if 10 or 20,000 of these pirate warriors died in battle. This was the magnanimity of the evil god. To Soren, the death of 10 to 20,000 pirates was nothing. Their deaths were not worthless. These people would save millions of civilians and at the same time, wash away a part of their sins. More importantly, Soren's kingdom should also be supplemented with a new batch of heroic spirits. In order to protect the heroic spirits and petitioners of the divine kingdom, the gods would also engage in a more tragic battle in the material plane. Those who died would be received into the divine kingdom to be reincarnated, and the original rebellious habits of the pirates would also change a lot. Soren was already qualified to play chess in the material plane. As a chess player and an evil god, Soren was cold enough and good at calculation. Mordor City needed to change the blood of the army because after the first difficult period, the pirates had begun to show signs of corruption and difficulty to manage. Their habits were very bad. They had followed Soren for the longest time, so many pirates could not be managed. They could only be sent to other sea areas to guard, but there were still many bad things happening. For example, in Raging Sand Island, Shipwreck Bay and other places, pirates who were born without knowledge and were rude and evil often committed some crimes, and some of these crimes would be transferred to Soren. After all, he was an evil god. What Soren needed now was not pirates, but a group of more disciplined navies. The roots of the pirates were there. Even with Soren's cruel suppression and strict legal protection, the pirates themselves were still difficult to restrain. For such a long time, there had been constant battles in Mordor City. The pirates were the main force on the front line. At present, the number of casualties was not small. The ones left were all elites. Some of the potential ones had been included in the officer class. Most of them were literate and quickly adapted to the current life. Most of those who could not integrate into the civilization and still maintain the pirate habits were placed in other islands and sea areas. Soren was now mobilizing these pirates. The number was about 50,000. Soren's plan should be about 50% of the casualties. Of course, before letting them die gloriously, Soren's church had to do something to tell these pirates where they belonged after death. Only in this way could they die for him. Life and death. Today Soren was no longer the Soren of the past. As a true god, he could decide the life and death of nearly 20,000 people with just a thought. Thinking of this, he could not help but murmur, "Is this the world in the eyes of the gods? It's no wonder that mortals are so insignificant to the gods." The mighty fleet began to gather, and at the same time, they transported troops to the vicinity of Port Tylon. These pirate warriors gathered together happily, calculating how many military merits they could get this time. The most valuable thing in Mordor City was military merits, which could be exchanged for too many things. And these people did not know that at least half of them would die in this operation. The priests of Soren's church also began to mobilize on a large scale. Their task was to bless these warriors. There were resurrected necromancers in the undead army. They had to bless the warriors and ensure that their souls could be taken into the kingdom after death. At the same time, in the third layer of the bottomless abyss, a large number of heroic spirits began to gather in Soren's kingdom. Under the leadership of the ugly monkey, a group of divine servants were transformed. They were ready to leave the kingdom at any time. After the heroic spirits died in the material plane, they would be taken into the kingdom. This would be a large number of heroic spirits. The estimated death of the pirate army was more than 20,000 people. In addition to other additional casualties, Soren's kingdom would welcome more than 30,000 petitioners this time, and many of them were qualified to be transformed into heroic spirits. Now, the number of shadow creatures that could be transformed in the kingdom had decreased a lot. Even if he controlled the entire kingdom, it was not enough to make up for the shortage. The petitioners that Soren needed to be killed in the material plane. This was the decision of an evil god. As an evil god, he could not be soft-hearted when dealing with these problems. Chapter 1006. The expansion of the undead became more and more serious. However, Soren also had a lot of things to do. Taking advantage of the buffer time after defeating the Dread Lord, he also aimed at the astral plane. The first target was naturally the Diamond Asteroid. In the boundless astral plane, there were many meteorites that had undergone material transformation like this. Some of them fell to the material plane as meteors. Currently, the largest diamond mine in the southern countries was caused by the fall of a certain meteor. However, it was controlled by the Wizard Alliance, and after hundreds of years of mining, there was not much left. Diamond was a common and rare material that wizards needed. Because it could be cut into diamonds, it was also very valuable among mortals and was loved by many noblewomen. Soren's need for diamond was not for money, but because diamond was consumed in high-end alchemy experiments and the production of legendary golems. Why did Mordor have so few diamond golems now? Was it because there were no legendary soul stones? Whether it was the bottomless abyss or the material plane, Soren could get a lot of high-grade soul stones. The key was diamond. To be honest, the production of diamonds in the material plane was limited, and the value was also very high. Buying them through conventional channels was enough to empty the treasury of Mordor. It was not impossible to synthesize diamonds, but it cost a lot and was very slow. The witches could only make very small diamonds by destroying elements. Then it was imperative to plunder resources from the astral plane. Whether it was the Northern Witches or the Wizard Alliance, they had never stopped exploring the astral plane for a long time, and powerful creatures from other planes also targeted the astral plane as their main target. The astral plane wanderer was a benchmark for high-grade legends. Mordor City. After explaining all the things that needed to be dealt with during this period of time, Soren locked the teleportation mark on the scroll and was ready to go to the asteroid to see the situation. "Do you need me to go with you?" Gloria sat on a wide and soft velvet chair, gently lifted her long hair and said, "Maybe I can help a little." Soren shook his head and said, "No. Mordor City still needs you, and the astral plane wanderer will sell the information. This matter is definitely not that easy." The unknown meant danger. This time, Soren didn't set off with his main body. Instead, he created an avatar that possessed 80% of his strength while he remained in the arcane tower. "Then I'll help you open the portal," Gloria said as she stood up. Soren did not object this time. Since he had to activate it, it was better to conserve his divine power. He had a feeling that there was something dangerous on this small planet. Otherwise, the other party would not have given up so easily. A white light appeared. After Soren's avatar nodded to Gloria next to him, he went straight into the portal. In the boundless astral world ocean. As soon as Soren stepped out of the portal, he saw a white halo surrounding him. This was the area of the astral sand. This silver river was spread all around the astral world. It was a very special substance. The asteroid was now in the astral river. As soon as it reached this place, Soren felt a dangerous aura. A huge creature was swimming not far away. Astral giant whale. A special kind of astral world life. It looked somewhat similar to the whales in the material plane, but its body was up to 1,000 meters long, and the largest maybe tens of thousands of meters long. It was a dangerous creature that wandered in the astral world. They were the original inhabitants of the astral world. A strong sense of crisis emerged, and then Soren felt a little pain. Then crazy data appeared, affected by strong radiation. Force test of exemption triggered. Constitution test failed. Tenacity test failed. Under the influence of high-intensity radiation. You received 10 points of radiation damage per second. An invisible energy field enveloped Soren. This was the energy radiation on the asteroid. The destruction of matter brought terrible energy. Even with the ability of his avatar, he could not avoid it and received such high damage. If it were immortal, how serious would it be? Damn it. How can there be such strong radiation on it? Soren put a layer of protection on himself, but the effect was not very good. The invisible radiation had been hurting him. Even with his amazing vitality, he could not hold on for too long. He had to constantly buff himself and heal himself at the same time. He tried to take a step forward, but it was very difficult. He could not help but be surprised. Such a high gravity? It was a terrible gravity. This asteroid had a gravity far beyond that of the material plane, even higher than that of the Earth elemental plane. According to Soren's preliminary estimate, the gravity here was more than 50 times that of the material plane. This meant that it was extremely difficult for ordinary warriors to walk here. Is this going to become a white dwarf? Soren laughed self-deprecatingly. The gravity of a white dwarf was much more terrible than this. A normal white dwarf had a gravity 1 billion times that of the material plane. Basically, it could only be reached in the form of pure energy. Even most elements would be affected, which meant that even atoms and electrons would be affected. Although the structure of the multiverse was different, there were still some similarities. In this world there was something called annihilating matter. It could be found at the edge of the abyss in the distorted nether. It was a very rare material and Soren had a little bit of it. Some of the annihilating matter was only the size of a fingernail, but it weighed more than 10 kilograms. This was caused by elemental collapse. According to the knowledge from his previous life, Soren knew that there were molecules, atoms and electrons inside matter. Things that seemed to have no gaps were actually filled with space inside. When these spaces were compressed, the elements would collapse, and a huge object would be directly compressed to a very small size. Some divine artifacts did not look big, but their weight was amazing. Some things looked small, but they could be tens of thousands of feet long. There was a very strange relationship between these. There is no doubt about it. Soren looked down at the crystallized ground under his feet and muttered, "This asteroid seems to have passed through the distorted nether. Its size has been greatly reduced because of the elemental collapse. It was such a small planet. The gravity was more than 50 times that of a material plane, so its size could be estimated. It was definitely hundreds of times bigger than it was now. Perhaps because of the distorted nether or some other reason, the elements inside the planet had collapsed. The elements were just like the molecules and atoms in his previous life. Their structure had been completely changed. The gravity is not more than 10,000 times. Then the change should be on the molecular level. The atoms inside should also be distorted. But according to the rules of this world, the small things that have been changed should be called elements. There were gaps and rules in the arrangement of substances, but if the smallest thing was directly compressed, its nature would begin to change. Just like Earth in his previous life, if the elemental collapse happened according to the rules of this world, the molecules and atoms would be directly crushed together, and the size of Earth would be directly reduced by hundreds of thousands of times. Supergravity. Super radiation. Soren sensed his surroundings and muttered, "No wonder that astral wanderer gave up on exploring. With such a strong gravity, it was difficult for spellcasters to walk on it." Even Soren felt that it was a little difficult after taking a few steps. He was not yet in his divine form, so he was not completely immune to the effects of gravity. 50 times the gravity was enough to directly kill any ordinary person who reached it. The elements have been crystallized. A golden light appeared on Soren's fingertips. He cut out a structure from the asteroid in front of him. It was a pale white semi-crystallized material. It was only the size of a fist, but it was heavier than steel. He muttered, The elements on the surface have collapsed so much. Then the elemental inside should have been completely destroyed. The destroyed material seems to have its own gravitational effect. In other words, it is very likely that a large destroyed core has been born inside this asteroid. Once the elemental destruction occurred, the weight of a material of the same volume would be more than 10,000 times the original weight. The unusual radiation and gravity of this asteroid should have been born because of this. How do I transport this thing back? The surrounding scenery quickly retreated, and the asteroid was still moving according to its original trajectory. It was not difficult for Soren to bring it back, but if he did not find a way to reduce its kinetic energy, it would destroy the entire outer islands. This thing hitting a material plane was much more exciting than an atomic bomb. Let's see what's inside first. Soren thought for a moment, turned his divine power into a long sword, and directly cut the surface of the asteroid. The surface was very solid and it felt like a steel armor. After cutting about 20 meters of thickness, Soren found traces of adamantine. It was not the scattered adamantine. Instead, it was a huge piece of adamantine that had been completely formed. There was no way to estimate its size, but the smallest one was the size of a fist. Its value was simply immeasurable. Soren's expression was very surprised, and he said to himself, "The elemental collapse really led to the birth of a large number of adamantine. The value of this asteroid is completely immeasurable. If we transport it back, the city of Mordor can mass-produce adamantine golems. But if we want to transport it back safely, we have to use divine power." It was not small. Its weight was amazing. There was only one way for Soren to transport it back, and that was to use divine power to guide it, and it could not be placed in a material plane because the damage it would cause was too terrible. What if I use divine power to reduce the impact, and then set up a circle to buffer it and send it to the shadow plane? Soren fell into deep thought. There was no doubt that this would also bring a lot of disaster to the shadow plane, but it would definitely be much less than the material plane. The most feasible way for him now was to send it to a place near the laboratory in the shadow plane. At most, he spent a few hundred divine power to strengthen the nearby space and material to withstand the impact of the asteroid falling. Soren was the god of shadows. If he used the power of the plane, he should be able to minimize the consequences. Chapter 1007. He could not swallow such a big cake by himself. In order to transport this thing back, the northern witches and Arendel's power must be borrowed. If Soren and Princess Royal join forces, they should be able to greatly reduce the consumption of divine power and avoid the possibility of some disasters. There was also the problem of the strong radiation of the asteroid. This required a huge protective energy enchantment and an isolation area. The source of the radiation should be the annihilation material. As long as Soren took away the annihilation material, the crystals and diamonds on the surface should not have such terrible radiation. The birth and destruction of matter was a very long process. In theory, many planes that currently existed could also be destroyed. Many annihilation materials were born because of the collapse of some half-planes. When a half-plane was about to die, a large amount of matter and energy would shrink extremely, and something like a black hole would form inside, and eventually connect to the distorted void. Finally, when the entire plane or the divine kingdom was destroyed, the extremely collapsed and contracted elements would be born into annihilation materials. They were things that were difficult for mortals to touch. Too strong radiation would kill mortals, and only high-grade legends and gods would pay attention to these things. Some demigod liches would try to use annihilation materials as phylacteries. In this way, unless it was a god, ordinary people could not destroy the phylacteries at all, and they could be resurrected constantly. It seems that I have to go and see Princess Royal. If he wanted to transport this crystallized asteroid back, it would cost a lot of manpower and material resources. It would be difficult for Mordor to transfer so many spellcasters to complete it. Soren had to borrow some ice witches from Arendelle, and at the same time, let some of the high-grade witches of the Northern Tower participate in it. As for the distribution of benefits, it was very simple. The diamond on the surface alone was enough to pay the reward. Moo! The scream of the astral giant whale came. Soren turned around and found that the astral sand in the distance was rippling, and then another larger astral giant whale appeared. It seemed that they were fighting for position. Two astral giant whales were fighting in the void. They followed the asteroid and did not want to leave its track, but they did not dare to get too close. Energy radiation? Soren seemed to have thought of something. He muttered, "Astral creatures seem to eat radiation as their food. This astral giant whale seems to like the radiation, but it seems to be afraid of it. It seems like they can't withstand such intense radiation. Even Soren couldn't withstand the radiation in his saint form, so these astral whales probably couldn't handle it either. They only dared to follow from a distance, enjoying the radiated energy. But it seems that he has left. After saying that, he disappeared on the spot. The Jinn were some lazy creatures, and they only actively fought against the bottomless abyss. For a long time they lived their own lives. Mordor City, Arcane Tower. As soon as Soren came back, Gloria greeted him and whispered, "How was it?" Soren's avatar disappeared, and then his original body stood up and said, "The harvest is more amazing than I thought. But it's also very difficult. I'm afraid we can't do it with our strength alone." After that, he introduced the situation of the asteroid, including super strong radiation, more than 50 times the gravity, and the astral giant whale that followed next to it. "Is the gravity so strong?" Gloria frowned and whispered, "If the gravity is so strong, it's basically impossible for ordinary people to get close. Can you cut it and bring it back?" Soren shook his head and said, "It's too expensive. Its structure is very hard, and just the outer layer is close to the hardness of steel. My divine power can't support cutting at all, and it's very slow to use weapons." Gloria fell into deep thought. After a while she looked up and said, "So you're going to send it to the shadow plane first?" Soren nodded. Gloria whispered, "The impact is too big. I'm afraid the shadow plane can't bear it. The elements collapsed to such an extent. This asteroid was originally not much smaller than a half plane. It would definitely cause a disaster if it hit the shadow plane. What else can we do?" Soren said. Gloria thought for a while, then suddenly said to the air, "Thaling. Calculate the capacity of the lock at full power, and the energy needed to fully open the lock." Lock. Gloria's words immediately opened Soren's mind. He looked up and said in surprise, "You're going to use the lock to reduce the impact?" Gloria nodded and said, "We can try. If it's possible, we can try to create an anti-gravity barrier and place a huge floating ring on it. With your divine power, it should be able to reduce the impact to a minimum." Floating ring? That was a good idea. The floating ring could greatly reduce the impact of the asteroid after entering the shadow plane. Coupled with the energy of the magic lock as well as the divine power of Soren and the Elder Princess, it might be able to safely land in the shadow plane. Was worth a try. Soren immediately had an idea. He looked up and said, "I'm going to see the Princess Royal now. You're in charge of contacting the Eye of the North. I'm sure they'll be interested." It was hard for women to resist diamonds, especially such a big one. Soren was confident that he could convince the Princess Royal, and the Ice Witch's demand for diamonds was not small. According to Soren's judgment of the asteroid, even if he distributed a part of the profits, his harvest was enough to make thousands of diamond golems. Of course he couldn't invest all the diamonds in it. But when can the floating ring be made? Hearing her words, Soren's expression was a little awkward. "It'll be fast. But the materials are a little short and I may need your help. After all, ordinary witches can't complete the task." Princess Royal bowed her head and didn't say anything. After a few minutes, he raised his head and said indifferently, "What are the missing materials?" "Leave it to me. I can help with the floating ring, but now the undead disaster is getting worse. We'd better finish this as soon as possible." Soren nodded. Then he took out a list of rare mithril and adamantine materials. Most of the materials in Mordor City were available, but these two were not common in the abyss. The eldest princess took it and glanced at it. Then she said calmly, "No problem. Send it to Mordor City tomorrow." Surprised. This time Soren was really surprised. The materials on this list were more than the inventory of Mordor City, and Princess Royal said it was no problem without blinking. It seemed that Arendel's background was deeper than he thought. But it was normal. A kingdom that had been passed down for hundreds of years, and it was the birthplace of the Ice Witches, so it must have accumulated a lot of resources. With the help of Princess Royal, the speed of the plan suddenly accelerated. There was also good news from the Northern Tower. The Eye of the North would fully assist Gloria. It only took 3 days and the main floating ring was completed. They could prepare to bring the Diamond Planet back in 1 or 2 days at most. The mechanical realm of the clock Nirvana. With a golden light, Soren's avatar appeared in this huge clock-like plane. As soon as Soren arrived, he received a happy message from the Queen of the Fermi Ants. She said happily, "My master, you are finally back. I have fused with the divinity you gave me. Now the size of the insect swarm has doubled. I defeated another queen and completely swallowed her clan." Your servant is breeding a new kind of combat soldier ant. If it succeeds, it will be more powerful than ordinary soldier ants, which will be a useful help for Master. The insect race reproduced very quickly. Although a lot of them were killed by Soren and Thaling last time, they quickly reproduced during this period of time. However, their use for Soren was still relatively limited. This was just a foreshadowing for the future, and it might be useful. Soren comforted the insect queen with his mind, and then teleported into the Thaling One's tower. Welcome, sir, Lord of Shadows. The three Thaling welcomed the arrival of Soren, and Soren smiled and nodded and then said directly, I need a whole factory to make diamond golems. Do you have a way to help me complete it? The level of the golem factory in Mordor was not high enough. If it was to make iron golems it would be fine, but the efficiency of making diamond golems was very low. After taking down the diamond planet, the diamond golems in Mordor would be produced on a large scale. At this time the requirements for the golem factory would be very high. He must prepare in advance. Thaling One fell into deep thought when he heard this and then said, No problem. But we need a little time to prepare. Soren was getting closer and closer to a great divine power. For Thaling, such a god was worth investing in and making friends with. If it weren't for the Avatar crisis, it would be difficult for them to have a relationship with a god. Very good. Soren nodded and said, Then I'll have to trouble you. The diamond golems were very important in his future plan. Only the diamond golems could fight against the most elite Devil Legion. The impact of the undead disaster could be resisted by mortals, but the Devil Legion that retreated from the bloody battle of the Abyss, almost all the mortals would die. Soren could only use the golems to fight against them. As the army of Mordor gradually gathered near the south coast, Soren and Princess Royal's plan to join forces to intercept the Diamond Planet officially began. This operation was led by Gloria. Soren was responsible for using the power of the divine spark to teleport the meteorite to the Shadow Plane, and Princess Royal assisted him in completing the plane teleportation. Gloria's task was the most difficult. She not only had to calculate the location of the meteorite falling, but also had to arrange the protective energy enchantment in advance. At the same time, she had to personally install the floating ring. However, the premise was that she must be under the protection of Soren. The radiation energy erosion was very serious, and Soren had to play the role of a healer to bless her with magic. Chapter 1009. Happy birthday to myself today. By the way, I love you guys. La la la. 2 days passed in a blink of an eye. Just before the war against the undead on the south coast was about to begin, Soren, Princess Royal, Gloria, and the Eye of the North had also begun to implement a plan to intercept the Diamond Planet. In the endless astral world. In a dreamy and gorgeous galaxy, Soren's figure first appeared near the teleportation beacon, followed by a golden light, and Princess Royal also appeared next to him. During this time, Princess Royal lived in Mordor, and Soren prepared a special luxurious room for her. However, perhaps because of the arrival of Princess Royal, the winter of the Outer Islands came early. The next day after Princess Royal stayed, light snow began to fall in Mordor, and then there was a beautiful silver-wrapped scenery between heaven and earth. Soren could feel that Princess Royal's clergy had a strong interference in the mortal world. He was afraid that after the end of the Avatar crisis, she would be the first batch of gods to return to the kingdom of God immediately. Because if she was restored to the form of a true god, Princess Royal might stop the season of the entire Frost Kingdom in winter even if she did nothing. Is this the place? Princess Royal frowned as soon as she appeared, and then a divine shield rose. She wondered, such strong negative energy radiation? I'm afraid there's not only diamond in it, but also some other evil substances. Soren was silent. There must be other reasons for such strong radiation. According to his guess, there should be something similar to an axis that had strong radiation in this multiverse. To some extent, the more microscopic particles superimposed, the stronger the radiation, so most of the destructive substances had a curse effect, and only legendary creatures could offset it. If mortals held it, they would easily age and die. There were 2 more astral whales in the distance. It seemed that during this time, other astral whales had discovered this meteorite, but they still did not dare to approach it. Let's begin. Princess Royal waved her hand and the surrounding temperature dropped significantly. Soren nodded and activated an energy barrier. Then Gloria appeared. During this period of time, she had gotten along well with Princess Royal, mainly because she had mastered part of the domain of the wizard. Princess Royal was also a part-time ice witch, and as a deity, the Princess Royal had given Gloria a lot of inspiration in the structure of the weave. Princess Royal had also learned a lot of special knowledge from Gloria. For example, she had made a finished product yesterday, an animated alchemy construct, ice golem, that she had personally given life to, as well as a lower level, snow golem. Princess Royal's power was very special. She could construct a body completely made of ice in the blink of an eye. As long as she was willing, she could give it a trace of divine power or inject a soul crystal to activate it. This was an extremely terrifying combat strength. This meant that Princess Royal could create thousands upon thousands of ice golems to fight for her. However, this ability also had a fatal flaw, that was, the requirements for the environment and temperature. Ice golems would be damaged and melted in a high-temperature environment. They could only move freely below 0 degrees Celsius, that was to say they could only fight in a specific environment. However, there were also many advantages such as their ability to repair their bodies. This thing seemed to only have an obvious effect in a cold area. Oh. Even with Soren's energy barrier, Gloria's face turned pale after she arrived. There was nothing she could do. Although she usually took the initiative to spar with Soren and seemed to have good physical strength, in fact her constitution was only about 15 points. With the energy barrier she could also feel the damage from the nearby fear. Don't delay. Princess Royal frowned and urged, the negative energy here is too strong. Your current situation is quite special. You can't be directly affected. Leave here quickly after you're done. After that, she could not help but glance at Gloria's stomach. Soren seemed to be aware of this, but he did not speak. This was not the time to discuss this. It was not suitable to discuss this during the Avatar crisis. Gloria was also surprised. Then with a wave of her hand, rings appeared one by one. She used the Greater Mage's hand to control these rings out of thin air and quickly put them into the ground, while Soren was responsible for cutting the surface and arranging the floating rings one by one. 36 floating rings were arranged. The whole diamond planet shook, which meant that the plan was feasible. Soren could not help but be excited. You go back and prepare first. Leave the rest to us. After that, Soren and Princess Royal looked at each other. Saint form. As Gloria teleported away, Princess Royal and Soren entered the saint form at the same time. Change space, shard of divinity. Change reality, shard of divinity. Astral teleportation, shard of divinity. Plane teleportation, shard of divinity. A huge amount of divine power emerged. Soren and Princess Royal opened multiple shards of shard of divinity at the same time and wrapped the whole diamond planet in it. Immediately afterward, Soren waved his hand and said, Shadow. The void in front of them split open. Then, a gray world appeared in the orbit of the asteroid. Accompanied by the brilliance of divinity, the asteroid suddenly disappeared from the astral boundary. Then the astral giant whale following behind couldn't help but become restless. At the same time, near the tower in the shadow plane, Gloria and the Eye of the North were also waiting. The teleportation has begun. Chapter 10:10. The whole process was busy and fast. Whether it was Gloria or Princess Royal, there was an inexplicable satisfaction on their faces when they harvested these diamonds. Perhaps for women, these gems were really irresistible even for gods. Perhaps it was because he had seen too many diamonds. Soren was now a little numb. The entire diamond asteroid was rich in a large number of gem resources, almost comparable to the core area of the Earth elemental plane. In the core area of the Earth elemental plane, the Earth Jinn liked to eat gems as food. In addition, there was a large amount of metal inside the meteorite, as well as the astral sand that had condensed into a silver-white solid. As for the most common soil and rocks in the material plane, they were basically invisible because of the collapse of the elements. The composition of the semi-crystalline solid material was not clear. Anyway, it felt a bit like tempered glass, but it was not transparent. Soren directly opened an internal passage with his divine power. It would take at least a month to cut the entire meteorite, but the protective energy enchantment could not last that long. As he went deeper into the meteorite, he felt stronger radiation energy. When he finally reached the interior of the meteorite, a strange black crystal appeared in front of Soren. It was a huge destructive substance that had never been seen before. The original structure had completely collapsed and been reassembled. Soren separated the surrounding metal, then cut it out separately. But when he reached out and touched it, his face changed. What a strong negative energy. Soren tried to put it into the half-plane, but then a terrible weight pressed down, making him frown and murmur, "This strange weight is a bit unreasonable." The strange black crystal was about the height of a person, and its weight was more than 3,000 tons. It was unbelievable. Divine form. Soren's body appeared with a golden light, and he directly opened the space door to his own small half-plane, then grabbed it and threw it in. As soon as the strange black crystal entered the half-plane, it released a strong negative energy. At the same time, because the half-plane was not fully formed, Soren immediately caused a mutation when he put it inside the half-plane. This is. Soren looked at his demi-plane in surprise and mumbled, "The gravity is increasing. The concentration of negative energy is also increasing. Double gravity. Double gravity. Triple gravity. 4 times the gravity. 5 times the gravity." As the strange black crystal gradually fused with the demi-plane, the increase in gravity began to stabilize. The gravity on the periphery of the demi-plane was about twice as strong, and the closer to the center, the stronger the gravity was. It gradually increased from 3 times to 5 times. Soren seemed to have thought of something. Chapter 10-11. Night fell. Soren and Princess Royal also returned to the tower. Teleporting the meteorite to the shadow plane consumed a lot of divine power, so the next work was handed over to the golem puppet. Arendelle still needed Princess Royal to stay in the center, so she would return tomorrow with a batch of diamonds. The next distribution of income was that she would get 30% of the income, the northern tower would get 10% of the income, and Soren would get the remaining 60%. The first batch of diamonds had been quietly shipped out. They would be sold near the Wizard Alliance and then directly exchanged for resources. Maybe because of the diamonds, Soren clearly felt that Princess Royal was much more pleasant to him. It seemed that her favorability had improved a lot because of this cooperation. Obviously, her attitude had reached more than friendly. This was a good situation. After all, Soren and Princess Royal had a close relationship. They could not be tied together by alliance and interests alone. Personal friendliness was also very important. The golem factory in Mordor had now begun to operate. It took a lot of time to make diamond golems. At present, Alice was mainly responsible for this part. At the same time, she was also in charge of the operation of the diamond golems. According to the preliminary statistics of Thaling, if there were enough soul crystals, this diamond planet could make at least 15,000 diamond golems. 15,000 of them. The combat strength of the diamond golems exceeded that of the legendary warriors. So many diamond golems were enough to determine the outcome of a large-scale abyss blood war. Soren felt excited. This was the first time he felt that he had enough confidence to deal with the Avatar crisis because he could fight with the devils and demons by relying on the golems alone. If he added the legendary professions of Mordor and the power of the allied gods, then Soren's strength would not be worse than any divine system. However, Soren frowned when he thought of this and murmured, "At present, the only thing missing to form a divine system is the power of greater divine power. I must advance as soon as possible." A god without great divine power was not qualified to be called a divine system. The sea goddess had cultivated a lot of gods for so many years. Why was it not a divine system? Just because she was not a great divine power. Mid-level divine power only meant that you could occupy a seat among the gods. But if you wanted to divide the god system and divide the land, it was impossible to do so without a strong divine power. The framework of Soren's divine system had been created, but if he did not become a great divine power, he would still be an ally of the gods. "I'm already a great divinity." Soren frowned as he pondered. He murmured, "If I want to advance to a great divine power, I need to obtain enough divinity value. My current godhood value is 240 points. If I want to continue improving, there are very few people I can choose from. The number of gods was limited. Why were there some mortals who ascended to godhood, but there were very few who reached mid-level godhood? This was because all the divine creatures in the material plane added together could only support a god with intermediate divine power at best. As for increasing one's godhood value, it was even more difficult. Basically, every godhood value had its own godhood value. If one godhood value wanted to be promoted, another godhood value would fall. Soren still lacked 60 godhood points. If he wanted to kill a weak godhood value, he needed 6 godhood points, and he had to completely absorb their power. So Soren's goal could only be a mid-level godhood value. That way the choices would be reduced a lot. Basically, he had to choose a godhood value. Sirik is the first target. But at present his location is uncertain. Sirik has the divine title of conspiracy. It's not easy to plot against him. Soren continued to think. Now it's the undead disaster. At present, there are 2 gods that are the easiest to deal with. One is the king of the dead, Klemvox, who is seriously injured. But no one knows where he is hiding. The second one is the god of Lich, Vishalan. I know where he is. But to deal with him, I'm afraid I'll have to meet a god from another world. A god from another world. There were many gods from another world in the material plane. The entire pantheon was very tolerant of gods from another world. The orc god system was a god from another dimension, and it had spread over here from other dimensions. The god of knowledge was also a god from another dimension, and even the god of light was a god from another dimension. This was because his predecessor, the sun god, was a god from another dimension. Later on he was assimilated by the material dimension. Strictly speaking, other than the gods born from the battle between the Lady of Silver Moon and the Lady of Night, as well as the gods from the native plane, the other gods were all gods from another world. They came from another world and took root here. The easiest target to harvest in the undead disaster was the god of Lich. He also had a trace of the power of a mage. But to harvest his head, one had to face another god from another world, the goddess of death and magic. She came from another world and came here for some reason. At the same time she was also involved in the battle between the gods of death. She was a goddess who was preparing to rise from mid-level godhood to greater godhood. Her relationship with Naruto was very strange. It seemed like they were cooperating but also seemed like they were enemies. These two mid-level gods both wanted to master the power of death and use it to rise to greater godhood. The goddess of death and magic. Soren knocked on his head and murmured, "This goddess is really difficult to deal with. But there is still a little time. The god of Lich seems to have fallen at the end of the year. He should still be alive now. Robbing the power of death. The god of Lich participated in the sneak attack on the king of the dead, Klemvox. He must have the power of death. Good news." Just when Soren was thinking, Gloria's figure came in from the door. She looked a little excited and said, "Mother just sent back the news. She has obtained the information about the core of the Mies. If she succeeds she can bring the core of the Mies back in a month." The core of the Mies. Soren's expression was also shocked. He said in a deep voice, "That is to say the island of Moder can rise next year?" Gloria nodded and continued, "It's not just that. The core of the Mies can provide far more energy than the elemental furnace. Even to some extent, the core of the Mies is a kind of almost infinite power. As long as it can be maintained, it can continue to support all the consumption of the floating city. Not only the rise of the city, but also the complete operation of the magic lock and the maximum energy shield. In short, if the elemental furnace was compared to an ordinary power plant, then the core of the Mies was a super huge nuclear power plant." Soren said seriously, "Tell your mother immediately. No matter what material and assistance you need, tell me immediately. The city of Moder will provide everything she needs." Once the core of the Mies was obtained, the city of Moder would have energy that could not be squandered. At that time, not only the most basic supply, but also other aspects of the city could be arranged according to Soren's requirements. Even if the energy was really as amazing as Gloria said, Soren could configure the city of Moder according to the standards of the Star Age. Energy was the foundation of everything. If there was endless energy, then the technology tree of Moder could directly usher in a super explosion. The core of the Mies would become the well of eternity of the city of Moder. P.S. Second update. That's all for today. Chapter 10-12. Moder City. Inside the Great Temple. As a black shadow appeared in the secret room in the center, 3 men and 2 women who had been waiting for a long time bowed their heads respectfully and said, "Lady Nightingale." The black shadow was a woman with a tall and beautiful figure. Her slightly pointed ears meant that she was a second-generation half-elf, which meant that her father or mother had a pure-blood elf. The half-elf assassin was wearing a large black cloak. She glanced at the others and said, "My lord has an oracle. The 5 of you will be sent to Sigil City to assist Lady Corinne. All actions will be at Lady Corinne's disposal. Do you understand?" 2 of the 3 men and 2 women were half-elves and the other 3 were humans. They belonged to the Inquisitors, assassins and shadow dancers who were responsible for dealing with unspeakable matters. They were the most elite group of people under Soren's command. More importantly, these people were given a trace of divine power and divinity. Nightingale was one of the best. She was more talented than other rogues. She was almost a natural assassin, and she had superhuman perception. Therefore she was more favored by Soren and was given a status and strength far beyond others. To some extent, Nightingale was equivalent to half of Soren's chosen. Understood. The 5 of them knelt on one knee. Nightingale nodded with satisfaction, then said, "Come with me." The group walked through the winding underground corridor and then came to a spacious secret room. There were already many people waiting here. The rogues glanced at them and couldn't help but be slightly stunned because there were many high-grade witches in front of them. Nightingale said at this time, "They will go to Sigil City with you." The teleportation circle had been set up. The personnel for this operation was very professional. There were priests, rogues, wizards, warriors, rangers, monks and droll. The whole team reached more than 20 people, and all of them were high-grade professions. There were several legendary figures among them. As Soren's divine power became stronger, some of the talented believers who could access core areas such as slaughter and death also improved rapidly. The others present did not speak and the atmosphere was a bit dignified. As long as one was not an idiot, one would know that this operation was definitely not easy, and it must be very important. At this time, a man in a gorgeous wizard robe came in. Lord Saruman. The others bowed their heads to show their respect, and Nightingale also bowed slightly. Saruman, who was blessed by divinity, improved his strength the fastest. Now he had the strength above legendary and was close to demigod. He glanced at the others as if there was a trace of divine power, and then he said, "In order to ensure the success of this mission, I will go with you. Let's go. Open the portal." Saruman took the initiative to participate in this operation. Although his strength increased quickly, his experience did not keep up. Saruman did not want to be an academic wizard, so he wanted to use this operation to train his ability. A legendary wizard was not easy to die, so Saruman wanted to use this operation as a trial. The wizard in charge of the preparation began to inject magic and locked the portal to Sigil City. Saruman was the first to step into the teleportation circle, and the others followed. After all of them were teleported away, Nightingale turned around and walked out. She still needed to report this operation to her master, Soren. In the tower, Soren's figure appeared behind Gloria and said slowly, "The first batch of people has arrived. The High Priest will send people to support soon. If you need anything else, tell your mother to tell me immediately. I will find a way to send it to her." Soren was determined to get the Mies core. Whether or not Mordor City could rise this time depended on the success of Fallen Witch's operation. Soren was still a little confident in her because to some extent, Fallen Witch was more reliable than Gloria. She was a person who did not care about the means, and a place like Sigil City was very suitable for a woman like her who was ruthless enough. Gloria heard this and looked away from the crystal ball and said softly, "Mother said that this batch of people is enough. Sigil City can't have too serious a conflict, or it may alarm the Lady of Pain. She is trying to negotiate to get the thorium core." The survivors of the Arcane Empire seem to have divided into two groups. One group wants to stay in Sigil City and the other wants to return to the material plane. Mother said that she has more than 50% confidence that she can get the thorium core through negotiation. Return to the material plane? This was almost impossible. The material plane had been divided by the gods, and there were also the Northern Witches and the Wizard Alliance. These survivors of the Arcane Empire would not be of much use even if they returned. There were too many enemies to face. Soren nodded and said, "It's best if she can negotiate. I'll wait for her good news." As the evil god in charge of shadows, slaughter and death, Soren did not mind using other means to get all this when necessary. There were already a large number of high-level assassins in his church, which was enough to solve most of the problems among the mortals. South Coast. From the south of the City of Wealth to the north of Port Tylon, more than 120,000 coalition forces had gathered. This operation was led by the great Shadow Lord Soren, and even attracted the attention of many good gods. Because the purpose of this operation was to completely eliminate the undead near the south coast, and there were not many forces in the material plane that could gather so many professionals at once. This operation to encircle the undead was centered on the army of the City of Moder. Among them, the City of Wealth sent 8,000 troops, including a group of priests and a group of monks. Port Tylon sent 5,000 troops, including a group of priests led by an archbishop. The Church of Agriculture sent 1,500 troops, most of which were priests and droll. What surprised Soren was that this operation also received the response of the Lady of Silvermoon and the Goddess of Love. At the same time, a group of paladins under the Lord of Light also joined the battle. However, these paladins did not like to stay with them. Instead, they chose a route alone and prepared to cut into the army of the undead and kill the lich who was responsible for controlling the undead. These paladins brought the legendary weapon, the Star of Day. In order to cooperate with Soren's operation, the Northern Tower also sent a group of witches. At the same time, because of the call of the god Soren, some adventurers also responded to his call. First of all, Soren's legend in the material plane was very high. Many adventurers worshipped him very much, and many of his rogue followers gathered spontaneously. Finally, the undead calamity itself was a threat to all living beings. The outbreak of the undead calamity put the adventurers in a very dangerous situation. There were also those whose loved ones had died at the hands of the undead. In the end, these people elected a person called Nord as their leader. The number of people gathered was also around 10,000. The army of Raging Sand Island had advanced to the city of Bernard. The army led by the half-elf first mate had encountered the first wave of undead troops. It was a group of ghouls driven by hunger. They had been spreading along the south coast to hunt, attacking any living thing that could be eaten. The ghouls were the vanguard of the undead army. They moved faster than the skeletons, and there were a large number of ghouls. When more evil ghouls began to appear, the army led by the half-elf first mate began to settle down, waiting for the other troops to arrive, as well as the allied forces from the Principality of Rossard. In order to deal with these undead and to restore her reputation, Mrs. Duke of Red Dragon even personally negotiated with the rebels in the Principality of Rossard. In the end, both sides reached an agreement to target the undead first. After all, no one wanted the whole kingdom to become a paradise for the undead. No matter who won, they could only get a ruin. The Duchy of Rossad's rebel army only had around 30,000 soldiers. The Duchess of Red Dragon had put everything on the line and managed to gather around 100,000 soldiers. In a battle of this level, the role of the militia was very small. If they used human wave tactics to fight against the undead army, they would only drag themselves into the quagmire of dealing with the resurrected undead. Mordor City in the study. A tall half-elf woman entered carefully, then whispered, "My lord, the army on the south coast has begun to move. Lady Adele Isabella has encountered a group of necromancers. They found this on the enemy's body." After that, the beautiful half-elf believer sent a special emblem to Soren. Skull and sickle. This was a very eye-catching and very special emblem. Soren took a look and frowned, murmuring, "Naruto." Sure enough, it was him. The spread of the undead disaster was very fast. It had only been about a month since the outbreak. This was a barren medieval civilization background, and the communication roads were seriously backward. Only the intervention of the evil gods could cause the disaster to break out so quickly. Soren took a look and threw the emblem back to the half-elf in front of him. Then, he pondered for a moment and said, "Give this emblem to the Church of Glory." At the beginning, Naruto was just secretly manipulating the situation. Now that the king of the undead, Clemvox, was seriously injured by him and his whereabouts were unknown, Naruto was now standing on the stage ready to launch the undead disaster. He was the abhorrer of life, enemy of good, messenger of darkness, and reaper of flesh and blood. A god of death with intermediate divine power close to great divine power. And his strength was probably 30% stronger than Soren. Such an enemy was not something that Soren could deal with alone. Since the other party had even sent out his own believers and priests, Soren felt that it was time to help him draw a wave of hatred. Chapter 10:13. For the gods, secretly manipulating something and directly sending out their believers to participate in it were two different situations. The god of death, Nero, had even sent out his own believers. That was equivalent to laying all his cards on the table and challenging the gods. Basically, most gods did not accept the undead as believers, and Naruto's favorite thing was to end lives and resurrect the undead. At least 30% of his believers were high-level undead, 50% were half-undead monsters, and the last 10% or 20% were half-dead living people. Naruto was an absolute supporter of those who did evil for their own pleasure. In Naruto's cold view of the world, everything was the same. For him, all living creatures were a great insult to him, the god of death. On the contrary, all dying creatures were sparkling with green and black sparks of joy, and he liked these sparks. Some people did not pray to Naruto devoutly, hoping to obtain Naruto's power. Most of them were given death as a reward by Naruto. Because few people were tolerant of Naruto's priests, they often acted in secret and independently. Except in places where evil was everywhere, there was almost no organized Naruto church. Because there was no hierarchy, the independent small churches often had internal conflicts. Moreover, the god of death was still the object of fear here, and evil people were also afraid of the god of death. When Naruto's priests did not need to disguise themselves, they usually wore rusty red robes. If their behavior was discovered, they would move to a new place and continue to hunt. Some of them lived a traveling life and pretended to be kind people, appearing in one town after another. Naruto's temples were usually hidden. Even in places where evil was everywhere, they were usually built underground, usually part of the underground tomb. Most of the temples kept undead creatures and other creatures that spread death or created death, such as banshees and demons. If we want to stop the undead disaster, it seems that we can't avoid facing Naruto head-on. Soren frowned. To be honest, he was still a little afraid of Naruto. No god would have absolute confidence in defeating the Grim Reaper. He stood still in thought for a long while before muttering, "Naruto has a lot of enemies and he himself is also an otherworldly deity. If we want to deal with him, we have to borrow the power of other gods. The god of light is the first target. He will not allow Naruto to end all life in the material plane." Of course, Naruto did not have the ambition to go against the pantheon. What he wanted was death, a large number of deaths and the end of a large number of lives. In the end, he could directly advance from middle divine power to great divine power. However, if one were to simply rely on death to advance, this number would be extremely terrifying. If Naruto wanted to successfully advance, at least half of the mortals in the material plane would have to die. This was a bit of the bottom line of the gods. The gods had not made a move yet. On one hand, they were not strong enough to defeat Naruto. On the other hand, they did not dare to fight against the Grim Reaper. On the other hand, the powerful ones did not want to provoke an enemy. It's not enough to rely on the god of light alone. We have to find an enemy for Naruto. The gods were actually very selfish. In the face of such a tough battle that threatened their own safety, not many were willing to stand up first. Soren thought and muttered, "Who else can stand up against Naruto? The goddess of suffering, Ilmet? The goddess of the forest, Marikai? The silver moon, Surin?" There were only a few in the human god system. The possibility of the elven god system making a move was hard to say. The orc god system was even harder to estimate. The dwarf god system had always been unreliable. The halfling god system was not bad, but their racial bias was too obvious. If the halfling was not in danger, those gods would not make a move. Right. Soren seemed to have thought of something and murmured, "Naruto is so high profile. If I were Sirik, what would I do?" For a moment, Soren began to think in another person's shoes. Sirik was the god of murder. His clergy was special. If he wanted to recover, there were only so many targets to choose from. Soren, Vivian, Clemvox, Naruto. Compared to the city of Mordor, which was far away in the outer islands, Naruto, who had obviously attracted the attention of the gods, was more obvious. If Soren was Sirik, Naruto would definitely be his target. Basically, as long as he took the power of Naruto, Sirik could recover his original strength. Maybe I can lure the snake out of its hole. All the clues were inextricably linked together. At present, it was just a matter of who could not help but make a move first. Soren was very patient. He had no particularly dangerous enemies at present, so he could quietly wait for Sirik and Naruto to make a move. But at this time maybe he should throw out some bait. Come. Soren thought for a moment, waved his hand and a black shadow appeared in front of him. The shadow knelt down on one knee and said, "My lord, what can I do for you?" He took out a document from the desk and handed it over. "Let the assassins act according to the arrangement on this document. If you find anything unusual, tell me immediately." "Yes." The black shadow bowed and left. The mining of the diamond asteroid was on the right track. It was estimated that it would take 3 months to finish mining. The bottomless abyss had consumed too much energy to attack the kingdom of fear. At present, the demon incarnation was constantly recruiting. It was estimated that it would take more than a month to reassemble the demon army. Thaling, who was in the mechanical realm of Nirvana, had begun to make advanced golem factories. It would take about half a month to complete. Gloria's research progress was still continuing. Alice was busy making puppets. Fallen, which was still working in Sigil City. The War of the Undead on the south coast was in charge of the High Priest. Unless there was a true god involved, Soren was not ready to go personally. In this way, Soren also had a rare buffer time when he was in Mordor City. He decided to use this time to teach Vivian how to become a new god. Although the little girl was very smart, she was still too young after all. Vivian did not have Soren's data on her body. At present, it would take her a whole day to deal with the prayers of the believers. In fact, other gods did not have much time to appear. The reason was that a lot of energy was consumed in responding to prayers. At present, Vivian's church had about 30,000 people. Because of the integration of everything in the Church of Fear, the number of Vivian's believers was about 200,000. Among them, the proportion of Pam believers was very high. But even so, the number of prayers that Vivian responded to every day was very large. Pam believers prayed once every 3 days on average. Devout believers prayed at least once a day. Fanatics prayed at least 3 times a day. Vivian's believers in the material plane alone had to respond to more than 30,000 prayers every day. Then, the petitioners in the kingdom of gods would also pray. At present, there were more than 1 million people in the kingdom of fear, which meant that Vivian responded to at least 1 million prayers every day. Although not every prayer had to be fully responded to, devout believers and priests had to respond to divine gifts. Even if they processed 100 divine gifts in a minute, they could only process 6,000 divine gifts in an hour. One could only imagine how much work Vivian had to do. What Soren had to do now was to teach the little girl how to quickly respond to divine gifts, which required some mastery of divinity. At the same time, Soren's own strength should be improved. There were many kinds of divinity powers that gods could master. At present, Soren had the ability to change space, change size, Death's Hand, change reality, change form, divine shield, regional divine shield, divine shock wave, regional divine shock wave, language proficiency, character proficiency, cross-plane communication, astral teleportation and plane teleportation. Vivian, on the other hand, had even fewer godhood abilities. This was the biggest gap between them and other gods, so now Soren had to shorten this gap. If I want to improve to the standard of a normal mid-level divine power, the divinity powers that I still lack are Avatar, Destructive Strike, Creation of Magic Items, Creation of High-Level Magic Items, Divine Acceleration, Divine Creation, Divine Spell Specialization, Divine Spell Resistance, Divine Spell Penetration, Automatic Arcane Casting, and Absolute First Strike. In the study, Soren listed out the divinity powers that he needed to master one by one. After thinking for a while, he murmured, Avatar must be mastered first, then Destructive Strike, Divine Acceleration is equivalent to Time Stop, and finally, Absolute First Strike needs to be mastered. Avatar was a very powerful combat ability. Destructive Strike was equivalent to a crushing attack, and Divine Acceleration could replace Time Stop. These were all abilities that Soren needed. But Soren thought for a while and said, Automatic Arcane Casting is equivalent to a legendary or above accidental spell. It's also a very important ability. He thought for a while. Then, Soren listed out the divinity powers that he needed to help Vivian master. Divine Spell Specialization, Divine Spell Penetration, Automatic Arcane Casting, Arcane Proficiency, Divine Shield, and Change Reality. Seems like Vivian still has a lot to master. Unlike Soren, Vivian was a pure spellcaster, so the divinity powers prioritized spell casting. He thought for a while and decided which abilities Vivian needed to master the most, and then he thought about how to teach these abilities to Vivian. The growth of a god was very slow. Under normal circumstances, it would take hundreds of years to master these abilities, but now Soren could only give it to the little girl. Because if they were to fight against the Death Pantheon, Vivian would have to adapt to the battle between gods. Chapter 10:14. The morning light shone on the city of Mordor. The pale golden light shrouded the great temple, and Soren's figure was sitting on the throne. The power of faith was constantly flowing into his body. With the rise of a dazzling golden light, Soren's figure suddenly shook, and then he suddenly stood up with a happy smile on his face. I finally succeeded. The power of faith poured into his body like a flood, and then a golden mark was left on his divinity. This was an extremely important divinity ability. Only this level of divinity ability could leave a mark on a god, because this ability was called Avatar's Descent. Deity's Descent, Divinity Ability. A special divinity ability possessed by gods with intermediate divine power and above. When Deity's Descent is activated, immunity to all Circle 1 to 8 spells increases with divinity ability. Increases all resistances by 10 points. When activated, immunity to instant death, charm, control, energy drain and other negative statuses. Temporarily increases strength by 10 points, dexterity by 5 points, constitution by 5 points, and an additional 300 points of temporary HP. After activating Avatar's Descent, divine power will continue to be consumed. Avatar's Descent. This was one of the signature abilities of a god. If it was a god with great divine power, after activating Avatar's Descent, They would be directly immune to all spells from level 1 to level 9, which meant that only legendary spells could work. This divinity ability was not only very effective against other gods, but it also formed a complete crushing effect against mortals. That was to say, the effect of human wave tactics would be sharply reduced. Spellcasters below legendary level could basically ignore them. This was also the reason why many gods had fallen in the Avatar's crisis, but very few mortals could kill a god with intermediate divine power. Avatar's Descent was a very difficult divinity ability to master. Unless it was a combat-type god, some gods might not be able to use it even when they reached the level of great divine power. The golden light began to shrink into Soren's body. When he stood up, the whole temple had returned to normal. He calmly listened to the prayers of the believers and slowly said, "Now I have a little more confidence in fighting against the god of death." South Coast. The operation of cleaning up the undead in Mordor City continued, but as the intensity of the battle gradually escalated, some terrible creatures also appeared. The ghouls and ghosts had now become cannon fodder. The ones that were really difficult to deal with were the necromancers and skeleton lords. The traces of liches had also begun to appear frequently. Although the army of Mordor City was advancing step by step, the casualties were increasing. At the same time, the Duchy of Rasad's army also suffered heavy losses. Faced with such a huge sea of undead, there were only two ways to defeat them. One was to kill the high-level undead, and the other was to destroy all of them. The former was very difficult, and many liches had the ability to see through stealth and liked to hide behind the army. However, because of the Lord of Glory's army of paladins, the number of liches that had fallen so far had reached 5. All of them had died under the godly weapons, and even their phylacteries had been shattered. It seemed like the god of light was truly enraged this time. He injected his divine power into the morning star. When he killed the lich, he directly connected it to the phylactery and destroyed it. This was a method that only the gods could use. At the same time, Naruto's believers were increasing. The actions of the undead kings were often coordinated by Naruto's believers. Many of his priests were constantly resurrecting the undead, ending their lives and bringing death to the material plane. The smell of death in the material plane was getting stronger and stronger. Although Soren did not know where Naruto was, he knew that Naruto was most likely preparing for his promotion. Promotion to a great divine power. The number of deaths in Mordor City had exceeded 20,000. Relatively speaking, there were also hundreds of thousands of casualties among the undead. More than 150,000 ghouls had been permanently killed, and even the necromancers could not resurrect them. In the kingdom of God, the oracles from another world, led by the ugly monkey, were very busy. This time, the casualties brought a large number of heroic spirits to be reincarnated. Soren was the mastermind behind everything. In order to make up for the consumption of heroic spirits in attacking the kingdom of fear, he had transformed more than 25,000 petitioners at the cost of the army in the material plane, and the number of heroic spirits reached about 70%. Because most of these believers who died in the battle were professionals, many of them had the potential to be transformed into low-grade heroic spirits. With the army advancing step by step, the undead army was still retreating. During this time, they had brought tens of millions of casualties, destroyed hundreds of towns, and almost wiped out more than 30% of the population on the south coast. Soren did not know the situation in other places, but the casualties were probably higher than on the south coast. Because this time, even the Elven Kingdom could not be spared from the disaster of the undead. With the consumption of the ghouls as cannon fodder, most of them were civilians who starved to death and were directly transformed. The undead could not form an effective attack by relying on the skeleton soldiers. At this time, the horn of Mordor City's counterattack was completely blown. Mordor City. In Soren's study, the shadow of the high priest appeared and said, "My lord, the undead on the south and west roads have been cleared. The believers are very tired. Although victory has encouraged their fighting spirit, death is also consuming their fighting spirit. I suggest ending this battle as soon as possible because there are enough heroic spirits in the kingdom." The number of casualties reached more than 30,000. To Soren's surprise, only 20,000 of the 30,000 people entered his kingdom. It seemed that the proportion of people who believed in God was not small. He nodded and said, "Yes. Since the number of heroic spirits has almost recovered, then inform Gloria to get ready to end the battle." This was a harvest. It was like a shepherd harvesting his flock. After Soren harvested enough souls, he was ready to end it all. With his order, the guards of Mordor City immediately operated quickly. The witches under Gloria began to gather, and with the sound of hurried footsteps, more than 10 airships began to rise. Below the arcane tower, the purple crystal that stored energy emitted a dazzling light, and with the activation of the teleportation circle opened one by one near the Lion Plain on the south coast. Activate the battle command. Activate the first Clay Golem Combat Legion. Activate the battle command. Activate the third Clay Golem Combat Legion. Activate the battle command. Activate the seventh Clay Golem Combat Legion. Dong dong dong. Heavy footsteps sounded below the arcane tower, and the activated golem puppets walked out of the underground storage room silently and walked toward the teleportation circle under the control of Thaling. At the same time, on a battlefield full of blood and bones, a white light suddenly appeared behind the army of Mordor City, and then a portal opened and a golem with a faint red light came out of it. 1, 2, 3, more and more golem puppets appeared, and they gathered in silence, and then rushed toward the undead army from the side. There was a burst of cheers. In the cheers of the army of Mordor City, more than 1,500 golem puppets arrived. They advanced quickly with the cooperation of the witches and directly cut into the undead army of more than 100,000. The lowest challenge level of these golem puppets was above level 5, and they could completely crush the low-level undead. Especially the steel golems among them, the low-level skeleton soldiers could not even break their defense, and the ghouls could only leave shallow scratches. The golem army easily crushed these undead, opening a passage for the witches in the rear, and the necromancers hiding behind also appeared in front of everyone. Lion Plain. The appearance of the golem army completely changed the battle situation, and as the coalition army approached, a high-grade undead hidden in the rear finally could not help it. The smell of death filled the air. As the darkness spread, a necromancer holding a huge scythe appeared on the battlefield. A believer of Naruto. He prayed for Naruto's divine power and used himself as a medium to become his temporary incarnation. Mordor City in the Great Temple. Soren watched all this silently, and when Naruto's incarnation appeared, a smile appeared on his mouth. Finally, can't help it? Golden light emerged. Soren's shadow rose from the temple, and at the same time on the battlefield thousands of miles away, the saint priest Milan knelt on one knee and prayed devoutly. A golden beam of light fell from the sky, and at the next moment, a faint golden light appeared in Milan's eyes. Summon the oracle from another world. Milan slowly stood up, waved his hand and opened 2 portals behind him. Then 2 gray-winged god emissaries appeared on his left and right. Group courage. Group power bestowal. Shadow realm. The radiance of spells spread out along with the aura. At this moment, Saint Priest Milan seemed to have been deified, affecting the battlefield with a power that didn't belong to mortals. She looked at the front with a cold expression. Then, in the shadow realm, she disappeared instantly, and the next moment she appeared directly inside the undead army. The golden divine power turned into 2 sharp blades, and Milan floated like a ghost. Every time she passed, several high-grade undead were killed. Even the lich could not compete with her power. Often at the moment of being killed, the lich's phylactery hidden somewhere would be directly broken by some powerful divine power. The black scythe of the god of death struck. With a crisp collision sound, the incarnations of the 2 gods fought for the first time. Bottomless abyss. The 3rd floor. The Forgotten Land. Behind the Golumba arena was an active volcano all year round. Now a wide passage had been dug out by the Hezru, directly connecting to the magma layer inside the volcano. A team of demon guards guarded in front of the gate. Through the gate was a group of succubus in revealing clothes. Behind the gate was a huge pool with hot magma flowing in it. The temperature here was unbearable even for demons, but at this moment, there was a huge black shadow sitting cross-legged in the middle of the magma pool. The blazing flame shrouded it, and the wide demonic wings moved gently in the magma. Suddenly, an excited roar sounded, and then a huge figure of about 8 meters high rose from the magma. An endless amount of flame power surged toward the figure, and the blazing flames completely enveloped it. One could only see a terrifying shadow that was full of pressure. The huge figure waved its hand, and a burning sword appeared, followed by a flame whip that was more than 50 meters long. The terrible heat melted the rocks, and the pressure of the Lord-level demon enveloped the whole volcano. The Baelor, leader, Sauron slowly walked out of the magma. His body size at this time was very amazing. His bare chest showed terrible muscles like steel. The wide demonic wings were almost 15 meters wide, looking like huge dragon wings. He had leveled up. Sauron, who had successfully evolved into the form of the Baelor leader, was nearly 8 meters tall and weighed more than 7,000 pounds. His huge body size did not affect his movements. Even if he had evolved into a super-large otherworld creature, Sauron's dexterity was still as high as 25 points, and his strength had increased to a terrifying 40 points. The Baelor had two forms. One was the large otherworld creature, which added 30 points of basic HP. Each creature level had an additional 30 points of HP. The other was the large otherworld creature, which was the evolved form of the demons. The basic HP was 60 points, and each creature level had an additional 60 points of HP. And now, Sauron had evolved into a large otherworld creature. With the successful evolution of the Baelor leader, his HP directly exploded to more than 1,500 points. Chapter 10-15. After the battle in the Divine Kingdom of Fear, Demon Lord Sauron finally ushered in the most important evolution. There were two forms of demon evolution. One was to change the nature of the demon, such as evolving from a berserk demon to a berserk demon. The other was to continue to advance in the original form. There were two ways to advance. One was to take on other professions and the other was to change the basic form. This kind of advancement was very huge for the Baelors, including the Baelors. The profession advancement of the Baelors was mainly beheader, executioner, and so on. The form advancement was from large otherworld being to super large otherworld being. The latter's improvement was even greater, because after the Baelors were promoted to super large otherworld being, it was equivalent to adding the leader template. The super large otherworld being Baelors had twice the life base of ordinary Baelors. Once the evolution was completed, the Baelors could completely crush the giant dragons in terms of vitality. Let's take the red dragon, the most powerful of the chromatic dragons, as an example. A baby dragon's basic HP was 8 points, a baby dragon's basic HP was 12 points, a juvenile dragon's basic HP was 15 points, a young dragon's basic HP was 20 points, an adult dragon's basic HP was 24 points, an adult dragon's basic HP was 27 points, and an old dragon's basic HP was 30 points. In other words, the basic life of the Baelors was equivalent to an old red dragon. The basic life of an old red dragon was 33 points, the basic life of an ancient dragon was 36 points, the basic life of an ancient dragon was 39 points, and the basic life of an ancient dragon was 41 points. The ancient red dragon was only 41 points. According to the strength of the bloodline, the ancient red dragon was at least 41 points. The highest was uncertain, but there should be a lot of 50 or 60 points. At present, after evolving into super large otherworld being, Demon Lord Sauron's basic life was 60 points, which directly surpassed most of the ordinary ancient red dragons. Now, Demon Lord Sauron's attributes had changed. Name Sauron. Race, demon. Form, Baelors, leader, grade 6, super large otherworld being, plane crossing, evil, level, creature level 27 attributes, strength 40, agility 25, constitution 35, intelligence 25, wisdom 25, charm 25. Alignment, lawful evil. Note, other demons will be slightly hostile to your actions. Health, 15121512 demonic energy, 8506100000 domain. Massacre, frenzy, evil. Skills, sneak 285, deception 325, negotiate 215, literacy 270, intimidation 370, spellcraft 220, use magic equipment 220, listen 215, detect 225, search 190. Abilities, aura of fear, flame body, flame whip, burning explosion, bind, demon claws, +1 natural magic weapon, demon skin, damage reduction +10, demon resistance, all resistances +10, damage reduction 15. Boss, night vision 60 feet, resistance to electricity, fire, poison, acid and cold resistance 10 points, magic resistance 30 points, telepathy 300 feet, truth constant. Abilities, advanced dual wielding, advanced attack, multi-attack weapon mastery, beheading sword, exotic weapon mastery, long whip, super fierce attack, super whirlwind, super cleave. Spell-like abilities, soul manipulation, telekinesis, blasphemy, dominate monster, advanced dispel magic, order. Intimidate, evil aura, advanced teleportation, dominate demon, summon demon, telepathy, summon demon army, firestorm, once a day, implosion, once a day. Hot magma slid down from the demon Lord Sauron's body. Accompanied by a strong pressure, he slowly walked out of the palace. The succubus maids on both sides knelt down, looking at him with eyes full of fear and greed. These succubus maids had never seen such a powerful demon before. The strong masculine aura and power made these succubus maids unable to control themselves. They longed for a certain liquid from Sauron and believed that this liquid could give them the power to advance. Although these succubus maids tried their best to show off their voluptuous breasts and slim waists, Sauron didn't even look at them at this moment. He walked directly into the barracks with the demon guards. Advancing into the Baelor, the leader form had increased his power rapidly. Not only could he deal with the abyssal demon dragon entrenched in this level, but he could also deal with the Gnoll army. However, before this, Sauron needed more intermediate demons to enrich his army. The blood pool he controlled was not enough to meet the consumption. He needed more souls to hatch the abyssal demon worms and then transform into demons. Master. Groups of demon guards knelt in front of Sauron. The demon goblin leader rushed over as soon as he heard that Sauron had come out. Sauron glanced at his subordinates. The demon hunters acted as his personal guards, and the other demons stayed in the barracks. His realm of order brought a slight change to these demons. At first, they were much more restrained in their territory. Only when they went out would they show the chaos and brutality of demons. Souls. More souls. With the great increase in the strength of the demon incarnation, a crazy idea emerged in his mind. The souls in the bottomless abyss were limited. Although the abyssal blood pool would constantly transform the abyssal demon worms, the main body of the souls was still the river Styx. The huge number of souls was not much after being distributed by many demon lords. That was why the profession, Soul Stealer, was created. Now the order of the underworld was gradually collapsing. As a powerful evil god, Sauron naturally had the idea of getting his hands on the souls of the underworld. Many undead lords had entered the material plane. Not only the souls of the underworld, but also the places that were connected to the underworld had a large number of souls that could be plundered. As long as these souls were taken back, they could be turned into worms through the abyssal blood pool to replenish Sauron's army. This was a relatively dangerous operation. But if it was successful, not only could it greatly weaken the power of the undead lords, but it could also reduce the pressure on the material plane. The underworld has death's servants. It's not a very good place. Sauron's alarm clock flashed through countless knowledge of the other world. Planes and half-planes were filtered one by one. Finally, a place appeared in his mind, skeletal wilderness. A half-plane between the spiritual world and the underworld. The leader is a powerful skeleton lord. If I can plunder this half-plane, I can get at least 1,000,000 souls. The undead also needed souls to be resurrected. The river Styx grafted the entire interior of the multiverse. Many evil gods, devils, demons, and undead all cut off souls from the tributaries. If Sauron could take down such a half-plane, he could directly create an army of hundreds of thousands of demons. And more importantly, many high-level undead had entered the material plane. This was a very good opportunity. As a demon incarnation, Sauron could bring a large number of demons to the rear of the undead. As long as he succeeded, he could cultivate hundreds of thousands of demons. The divine power of death was dissipating. In front of the divine priest Milan, the undead priest in front of her gradually shattered. The fire of soul in front of her disappeared along with the light of divinity. Sauron won. Naruto seriously underestimated his strength. He thought that an ordinary incarnation could compete with Sauron's divine priest, but reality gave him a heavy blow. Not only did one of Naruto's chosen die, but he also lost 3 divinity points. However, this failure would also remind Naruto of Sauron's strength. Perhaps next time he would not send an enemy of this level to die. The golden light dissipated. Sauron's shadow disappeared from the divine priest Milan's body. The battle around them was about to end. The death of Naruto's priest made the undead gradually lose control. Sauron did not need to intervene in the next battle. Those mortals were enough to deal with it. Motor City. Sauron's original body stood on the tower and murmured, "It seems that Naruto's strength and mine are only 3 to 7. The gap had been calculated in the battle just now. Sauron's divinity and godhood were not as good as Naruto's, but he was basically immune to the special ability of the godhood of death. The other party was an enemy who was promoting to a great divine power. It was impossible for Sauron to fight against him alone, but it was not completely without the power to fight back. If he really wanted to fight, Sauron had about a 30% chance of winning. However, this chance of winning was still too low. If I want to deal with Naruto, it's best to use the power of other gods. Vivian is a fighting force, Princess Royal is also a fighting force. Gods with low divine power can basically be ignored. It must be a mid-level divine power. Soren thought and murmured, "Where is Clemvox? And the goddess of magic? She hasn't shown up for such a long time. Is she really going to lurk until the end of the Avatar crisis?" Soren, who was meditating, suddenly felt something. Then his figure disappeared, and the next moment he appeared on the sea dozens of miles away. A dazzling woman wearing a gorgeous robe and jewelry with skulls as decoration appeared in front of Soren. A faint divine light shrouded her. "Nice to meet you." The woman in front of him nodded slightly to Soren and said slowly, "Dear Lord of Shadow, the goddess of magic and death, Verges." Although the two sides met for the first time, Soren recognized the identity of the other party in an instant. The visit of the goddess surprised Soren a little, but he nodded and said, "Hello. The goddess of magic and death, Verges. A god from another world." She was also an outsider, a god from another world. Soren was a little surprised that the other party would find him. He was full of vigilance, but he did not do anything else. "Lord of Shadow." The goddess of magic and death seemed to feel Soren's vigilance and said directly, "The world you are in is being ravaged by death, which is not a good thing for any god. Not all gods of death are as extreme as Naruto, who believes that life must end immediately. I came to you to seek an opportunity for cooperation. As a god in charge of magic and death, I can't stay in this world for too long. So I hope to get an opportunity to advance from this world before I leave. And you, as a god in charge of the power of shadow and slaughter, obviously need a temporary ally to break through. Maybe we can try to cooperate. By the way, I seem to have found the trace of the king of the dead, Clemvox. He seems to be in a bad state. Maybe you can try to replace him." The goddess of magic and death, Soren's weakness seemed to be caught by the goddess of magic and death. Chapter 10:16. Soren narrowed his eyes slightly. If Gloria were here, she would definitely be able to guess that Soren was thinking and was already a little tempted. But Soren still couldn't trust the god in front of him. Not only because of her identity as an outsider, but also because of the death and magic in her clergy, which conflicted with Soren's. Soren thought for a while. Then he slowly raised his head and said, "Your proposal is very interesting. But I'm sorry, I'm not going to cooperate with you. And for a new god, rashly challenging the king of the dead isn't a smart thing to do." The expression of the goddess of death and magic, Verges, gradually froze. She had imagined that Soren would make all kinds of requests, but she didn't expect him to directly reject her. She couldn't help but ask, "Why? Because I'm a god from another world?" Soren shook his head and said, "No. It's because I can't completely trust you. And trust is the foundation of all cooperation. Besides, with the current situation, it's not the time to deal with the king of the dead. Even Naruto couldn't kill him after so long of preparation. It's not easy to completely replace him." The goddess of death and magic, Verges, was surprised. "You know all this?" Soren smiled and said, "The gods wouldn't be ignorant of this. Unlike your world, this world has already experienced a catastrophe. With the example of the fall of the three death gods, the gods are able to restrain themselves." The goddess of death and magic, Verges, was silent, but she wasn't ready to give up. Instead, she said, "What can I do to make you believe me?" Soren pondered for a moment and said, "Tell me your real purpose of coming here." The goddess of death and magic, Verges, was silent. Her expression was hesitant, but then she shook her head and said, "I'm sorry. I can't say it because if I say anything related, it will attract the attention of the other party. I can only say that I came to this world to seek an opportunity to advance to a great divine power. There is almost no conflict of interest with you, and I can help you advance to a great divine power in this world. You're a new god with great potential. But the Avatar crisis is just the beginning. With the end of this crisis, the power of the gods will be reshuffled. At that time, you will have to face more than just the gods of this world. The pantheon will be a bigger challenge. If you don't have enough strength, even the gods will encounter all kinds of problems. Why do you think the orc gods can enter this world? Isn't it because the native gods aren't powerful enough that a part of this world was carved up by the orc god system?" Speaking, the goddess of death and magic, Verges, the goddess of death and magic, and then disappeared into the sea. After hearing her words, he couldn't help but be. Because they had spread in this plane for too long, many people regarded the orc gods as the native gods, but in fact they were outsiders, gods who entered the material plane after the Battle of the Gate of the Orcs. In addition, there were the Mohan gods, the desert gods, and the dinosaur gods. Not all the gods could gain a foothold in the material plane, and some had gradually disappeared in history. The pantheon was the real big stage. After the end of the Avatar crisis, Soren needed to occupy a chair in the pantheon in addition to returning to the kingdom of God. The Avatar crisis had reshuffled the power of the gods, and the competition for the material world might lead to a new struggle between the gods. She was right, Soren did need to be a great divine power to ensure his status. I can't even say my name. Soren's figure returned to the city of Moder and murmured, "It seems that the goal of the goddess of death and magic Verges is very likely to be a great divine power. A great divine power could already obtain a very high status and control in a plane. If what Verges, the goddess of death and magic, wanted to do was related to a great divine power, then the difficulty would become very amazing." According to Soren's guess, this goal was very likely to be related to Verges, the goddess of death and magic, and it was likely to be a god above her. A god from another world. Soren pondered and murmured, "When should I go to other material planes? As a god from another world, I can fight if I can win and run if I can't win. Anyway, I don't have to worry about the consequences. Is it possible that they will chase me to this material plane to beat me?" Why was Naruto so fearless? It was because Naruto was also a god from another world, and this material plane was just one of his strongholds. The god of death, Nero, wantonly launched the undead disaster because his core belief was in another world. Even if he offended a large number of gods, as long as he did not fall, he could just return to his original world and start all over again. It was like a war between two countries. One was fighting in one's own home, and the other was fighting in someone else's home. These were two completely different concepts. Soren had more and more concerns, and he couldn't kill gods as casually as before. What? It was because of the Motor City, the foundation of the South Coast, a large number of mortal believers, and many people who served and followed him. Soren couldn't completely ignore these people. If he overdid it, the enemy would vent his anger on these people. However, if it was in other material planes, he really didn't have any concerns. The bottomless abyss. The third floor. The forgotten land. The barracks of the Golumba Arena had been expanded more than 3 times, and there were many more demons here than before. The night witches herded batches of abyssal worms forward on the wide granite road. These hideous worms with human faces were herded and hunted by the night witches from the wilderness. They were going to sell them to the demon merchants in the Garuba Arena. Tall buildings rose from the ground. The demon goblins drove the berserk demons to carry heavy stones. The buildings here were basically more than 10 meters high because the height of the demons was already amazing. Some hell worms were mixed in. As the Golumba Arena became more and more famous, many Yugros who smelled business opportunities came. Not only were there worms from other planes, but even the souls of the Bator Inferno were smuggled in. The most popular goods here were souls, weapons, and gems. There was a legend that the lord here, Sauron, was like a dragon. He liked to collect all kinds of gems and strange stones. It was said that these things were stored in his treasury. Golumba Arena sold a large number of weapons. The quality was much better than the demons, and the price was cheaper than the demons. The demon merchants would use the souls and gems they brought to exchange for these weapons, and then sell them to other places in the bottomless abyss. The third floor was a good transit station. It was far away from the location of the Abyss Blood War, and there was the river Styx leading to the lower levels. Now this town ruled by demons was glowing with a different prosperity. At this time, in the deepest part of Golumba Arena, a tall black shadow came to the lava pool behind the barracks. "Master." Rows of demons burning with raging flames knelt down to the Baylor, leader, Sauron. These were the demons he cultivated. At first there were only some fire demons, but with the war in the Kingdom of Fear, some of the fire demons began to evolve. When a new flame demon appeared, it meant that Sauron's plan was successful. Baylor, leader. The word leader not only represented Sauron's strength, but also his own combat power as a leader. It also meant that Sauron had the ability to create Baylor demons. If the fire demons he cultivated had not evolved into flame demons, he would not have been able to get the power of a leader so easily. This was a feedback ability from the plane. Baylor demons were one of the species closest to the original demons, and they had always been the most powerful demons, second only to the lords. The demons outside were all cannon fodder. Sauron really needed these more powerful Baylors to be able to run rampant in the bottomless abyss in the future and help his main body in the war in the kingdom of God. One by one, the fire demons stood up from the lava pool. Sauron used his blood as a medium to awaken many souls. Nearly half of the souls eventually died and were twisted, and the other half with potential were transformed into fire demons. At present, Sauron had a total of 127 fire demons. The war in the divine kingdom of fear had cultivated 5 flame imps and some flame imps elites. Now that Sauron had become the leader of the Baelor flame imps, what he had to do was to continue to expand the scale of the flame imps and train more flame imps. General of the Burning Legion, Archimonde, salutes you, my master. With the fluctuation of the lava, a flame demon about 5 meters tall walked out. He knelt down on one knee towards Sauron and said, "More of my kind are being transformed. Those dissipated souls have become nourishment. It is estimated that a new fire demon will be born in a month." Transforming a fire demon not only required a lot of souls but also an active volcano. Sauron was now accumulating numbers. The focus of the demon hunter had shifted to the kingdom of God. In order to cultivate new combat power, he was ready to directly cultivate a flame demon army. These souls alone were not enough. The growth of a flame demon required a lot of energy, and there was only one place in the entire abyss that could provide this energy. That was the Abyss Blood War. Now the intensity of the Blood War had been reduced a lot. Sauron was now waiting for an opportunity, a suitable opportunity to launch a blood war. As long as he won, he could directly cultivate a group of flame demons. Let the flames purify everything. As the leader of the Baelor demons, Sauron was looking forward to the arrival of his flame demon army. Chapter 10:17. Time quietly approached November. As the army sent by Sauron cleared most of the undead on the south coast, the refugees gathered near the city began to return to their homes. The Temple of Agriculture took the opportunity to expand the scope of believers. The priests of the goddess of agriculture and the Droll began to distribute winter wheat seeds to the refugees for free, and then settled these people in the land around the Wind Spear Hills. Because some cities had been destroyed, Adele Isabella also suggested that Sauron expand the size of the territory. So the Wind Spear Hills annexed the territory of 3 nearby cities, and the area expanded by about 500 square kilometers. Most of the original nobles in these territories died in the undead disaster. The surviving bloodlines were all collateral branches, and they were not qualified to compete for the right of inheritance. Similarly, with Sauron secretly backing her, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife also began to attack the nobles in the Principality of Rossard. The undead had been forced hundreds of kilometers away, close to the edge of the halflings' territory. The necromancers gave up this land and began to walk death in other places. Their task was to walk death in order to collect the power of death and help Naruto and the undead kings to level up. After this disaster, the population of the south coast had been reduced by about half. The rest of the population was almost under the protection of the big cities, so they targeted other places. For example, the Shire area, which had been almost unaffected from the beginning until now. The halflings were well protected by their gods and had not been affected much so far. But for the undead, they did not have so many concerns. The race of halflings was their next target. At the same time, in the outer islands of Mordor, the city hall began the 3rd census because of the approaching new year. The census of Mordor was conducted almost every year, but this year was a little different. Under the arrangement of Sauron, the high priest began to conduct a census of the number of believers in the church. Because of the help of the witches, the whole process of the census was very fast. A few days later, Sauron got a document. Very good. Sauron looked at the statistics and couldn't help but smile. You did a good job. The population of Mordor City grew rapidly. Now, with the population of Treasure Island and other nearby islands, the total population of Mordor had reached about 400,000. This was mainly because Sauron had completed the city's planning. The housing and farmland were enough to support the huge population. This number was still increasing. It was expected that the population of Mordor City would reach more than 600,000 next year. According to the statistics of the City Hall, many wealthy families from other places wanted to move to Mordor City to avoid the war. For this reason, the City Hall received a lot of extra taxes. Next was the number of Sauron's followers. This was a huge increase. At first, Sauron's followers were mainly concentrated in the half-elves, but now he had about 300,000 followers in the city of Mordor. The half-elves who originally occupied the main position were now only 1/3 of his followers. This had a lot to do with Sauron's dominion. Because of the prosperity of Mordor City, many humans had become Sauron's followers, and this number was still increasing steadily. There are 300,000 followers in Mordor City. If you add in other places, there should be about 1,000,000 followers. That is, if I advance to greater divine power, I won't be unable to bear the consumption. Gods couldn't advance randomly. If there was not enough followers, blindly advancing would only make one enter a period of decline. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 1,000,000 followers to maintain a greater divine power. If there were not so many followers, then the power of the god would decline little by little, and eventually decline back to intermediate divine power. Similarly, if the number of followers was enough, even a god with intermediate divine power would slowly advance. It may take hundreds of years to reach the level of a greater divine power. The expansion of Mordor city ensured the number of Sauron's followers. That was to say, he now only needed to make up for the divinity and divinity value to become a greater divine power. In fact, it proved that Sauron's initial layout was correct. If he didn't build Mordor city, he would have to rely on priests to spread his followers slowly like other gods. It was a very slow process. It was impossible without hundreds of years. The realm of bones. This was a half-bit wall between the spiritual world and the underworld. It was born more than 3,000 years ago, and its creator was said to be a demigod lich. In the long history of the multiverse, there were many powerful people who were comparable to the gods, and the demigod lich was undoubtedly the closest to the gods. Many demigod lich tried to get the power of a true god, but so far only the god of lich got it by luck. The mystery of the gods was not so easy, and the gods would not easily allow others to touch it. However, the legacy of the demigod lich was undoubtedly preserved, and that was the half-bit wall that he spent hundreds of years cultivating. Compared with other spellcasters, the demigod lich had enough time to squander, so this half-bit wall was already not small at the beginning of its birth. The half-bit wall would gradually grow over time. Therefore, there were more and more half-bit walls attached to the gap between the spiritual world and the underworld. In the end, it was almost the size of a small principality. Over the past 3,000 years, the realm of bones had gradually stabilized. Due to the death of the demigod lich, the demiplane was getting closer and closer to the underworld. In the end, it was attached to the underworld just like the moon orbiting the earth. Therefore, this half-bit wall also became a place where the undead lived. The underworld was the territory of the death god system, and many powerful undead were unwilling to rely on the underworld, so they could only gather in these half-bit walls. For a long time, this half-bit wall was controlled by a powerful winter ghost. This winter ghost was the creation of the demigod lich, and it had terrible strength. But later, this winter ghost was killed by the death god's servant, and a powerful skeleton lord took over this place. He called himself the Skeleton King. But in fact, almost no one cared about his title because basically every powerful skeleton lord liked to call himself the Skeleton King. The outbreak of the undead disaster caused this skeleton lord to covet the souls of the material plane, but he was cautious and did not send out all of his troops, but kept some of them to guard this half-bit wall, for he was afraid that others would rob this place. And today, under the gray night sky, near the edge of the half-bit wall, a blood-red portal opened. On one side was the gray territory of death, and on the other side was the dark red-hot plateau of the portal. Countless restless and excited demons appeared on the other side of the portal, and when the whole portal stabilized, immediately 2 secondary balers flew up excitedly and rushed directly into the half-bit wall. For demons, there was nothing more interesting than breaking out of the bottomless abyss and snatching other half-bit walls. P.S. There will be an advertisement for a game tomorrow. Slowly accumulate contacts and try to do something. Chapter 10:18. Groups of Hezru walked out of the teleportation gate. Unlike the demons in other parts of the abyss, the demon army that came out of the portal was more disciplined and not as messy as the other demon armies. Moreover, they were all equipped with excellent weapons. Although they were not as good as the elites of the demon army, they were basically magical weapons. Due to the high skin resistance of demons, most of these demons were not equipped with armor or were only equipped with part of the armor. Their bare chests were full of muscles with bulging veins, full of a sense of strength that mortals could not compare to. Behind the Hezru was a squad of 6-armed Marillion. These terrifying warriors were among the best in the abyss in terms of close combat ability. Any 6-armed Marillion could take on a small army by themselves. As the smarter demons, the Baler led the army. They split into 3 groups and advanced forward. This time, almost all of the demons that came out were intermediate and advanced. The inferior demon cannon fodder was not worthy of being teleported to the battlefield of other planes. The last group that came out of the portal was a group of flaming demons. There were 7 or 8 Balers mixed in with them. Then the demon lord, Sauron's figure, appeared behind them. This was the demon army that came from the Galumba arena. Sauron's strength was not enough to compete with the archdevils for souls, so this demi-plane controlled by the undead was within his range of plunder. There was a rule in the lower planes. Ever since the river Styx ran through the multiverse, the lords of the lower planes loved to steal souls from the river Styx. The servants of death and the oracles could only ensure that the souls of the more devout believers would be returned to the river Styx. However, the souls of the non-believers would mostly float along the river Styx before being distributed by the servants of death. This gave the lords of the lower planes a chance to reach out. Master. A tall elite succubus flew in front of Sauron. She smiled and showed her tall figure. Then she said, "There is a large group of ghouls in front. We should be close to the main camp of the undead." The faint sound of battle could be heard. Sauron nodded and said, "Let the Glabrizu and the Soul Judgment demons prepare. All the advanced demons prepare the soul assimilation spell." A team of demon elites flew out. As the place where souls were needed the most in the lower planes, the high-level demons of the abyss basically had a way to plunder souls. The Hezru at the front had already broken through the ghouls' defensive line, with some of the ghouls falling to their attacks. The Balers and Balrogs were picking out suitable enemies, and each time a legendary tier undead spirit appeared, it meant that they would swarm it, kill it and extract its soul energy. The ground of this half-plane was black. Some kind of poison had seeped into this land, and any food or water that mortals ate here could cause them to die. Some pale skeletons were exposed in the wilderness, and it was unknown when they had died. This plane was endowed with certain characteristics. The speed of decomposition of corpses was very slow, and the white bones would not decay so easily. On the contrary, it was easy for them to turn into skeletal warriors due to death and resentment. This was an ability granted by the undead monarch. They had transformed their kingdom into a suitable territory, and as long as that characteristic was not erased, they could constantly replenish their forces from afar. The undead did not have much intelligence. In the entire half-plane, there were millions of undead wandering. Among them, the low-level undead wandered in the wilderness, while the mid-level and high-level undead were incorporated into the army. They were responsible for guarding the Lord's palace, and most of the time they were in a deep sleep. They would only be awakened when the enemy appeared. A group of succubus maids dragged grayish-black soul crystals to Sauron. These were the spoils of war of the demon army. In the lower planes, the chances of a soul crystal dropping from killing enemies were not high, but if it was combined with spells, the chances would be greatly increased. Using the soul spell would definitely give a soul crystal. Very good. Sauron picked up a gray soul crystal and looked at it, feeling the energy in it, and said with satisfaction, "Continue to advance. Destroy the enemy. Destroy this place." Thousands of ghouls and ghouls were slaughtered, and the demon army advanced step by step until a towering fortress appeared in front of them. This was a fortress that had existed for thousands of years. At first, it was a lich's laboratory, but later it was transformed into a skeleton fortress by the winter ghosts. Finally, about 1,000 years ago, it was turned into a skeleton fortress by the undead monarch. The ground in front of them was pale white. Who knew how many skeletons were buried underground, and the air was filled with thick corpse poison. If it wasn't for the Devil Legion, the human army would have been annihilated here. But this was nothing to the powerful demons. They ignored the poison here and rushed directly into the skeleton guard army. About 300,000 undead were gathered here. This number was terrifying to humans because these skeletal guardians were all level 5 and above. However, this number was nothing to demons. The Baler leader of the third layer of the abyss, Sauron. A low roar came from the fortress made of bones in the distance. A skeleton king about 5 meters tall appeared in the fortress and roared at Sauron, "Why did you invade my territory?" The pale fortress was mixed with the color of blood. For thousands of years, it had absorbed the essence of countless skeletons. A thick aura of death shrouded this place, and every once in a while, it would automatically awaken the undead. For the souls. Sauron looked at the enemy calmly and said slowly, "Because you are too weak. You don't deserve to own this plane." Kiki. Hearing Sauron's words, many of the high-grade demons could not help but laugh strangely. This was the demon's cold joke. Sauron explained a principle very straightforwardly, and these high-grade demons felt that it made sense. Since ancient times, there had been no shortage of clowns in the chaotic evil camp. Hearing Sauron's cold joke, there were even Hezru who slapped their buttocks with their backs facing the enemy and mocked him without holding back. Anger made the skeleton monarch's soul flame jump. He said in a low voice, "Do you think you will win? This is my territory. Wake up, my skeleton army. Destroy these arrogant demons in front of me." A blood-red light appeared on the skeleton fortress. The entire fortress was enchanted with powerful magic. When it was activated, the aura of death began to spread, and then the countless skeletons gathered underground were all revived. Millions of skeleton soldiers crawled out from the ground. Over a long period of time, countless skeletons had been collected on this land, and when the magic was activated, they were all revived. Only this much strength. A secondary Baylor scorned. He was a demon who had retired from the bloody war in the abyss. At this moment, he looked at the skeleton monarch in disdain and said in a low voice, "Master, this useless fellow is not worthy of your attack. Leave him to me." Millions of skeleton soldiers surrounded the demon army. But from the beginning to the end, not a single demon showed fear. On the contrary, most of them showed contempt. Compared to the undead, the demons were also experts in human wave tactics. Basically, every demon had experience in fighting one against many. And in the bloody battle in the bottomless abyss, millions of soldiers were nothing at all. Any local conflict would have more than hundreds of thousands of demons. There were more than 600 levels in the abyss. These demons had basically experienced large-scale battles. At this moment, they did not feel anything when they saw millions of skeleton soldiers. "Berserker demons charge," Baylor ordered in a low voice. Thousands of berserker demons waved their heavy weapons and rushed over. Although it was still a little chaotic, at least a formation could be seen. These Hezru with over 25 strength and over 2,000 pounds of weight pushed forward, crushing the skeletons in front of them effortlessly. Meanwhile, a group of 6-armed Nagas were like monsters. They wielded multiple weapons at the same time, and any one of their whirlwind slashes could easily take out over a dozen enemies. This small group of 6-armed Nagas took out thousands of undead with just a single charge. Assassin demons lurked in the darkness. They quietly approached and aimed at the necromancers in the rear. As legendary demons, they were born to be top-notch assassins. Flaming demons and Balrogs also gradually joined the battle. They were like the turrets of the demon army. Every attack would bring about a violent explosion. Sauron did not have any room to attack in the entire battle. He sent out more than 30 legendary demons this time, and they completely killed their way into the skeleton fortress. As expected, Sauron thought to himself. Although the abyss has been defeated by the demons because of the chaos, it is still the most powerful force in the lower planes. A group of beautiful succubus maids surrounded Sauron. Since the battle did not need a demon lord like him to fight, the witty succubus naturally seized this opportunity to curry favor with their lord. Succubus maids surrounded Sauron, trying to use their fullness to rub his body to attract Sauron's attention. There were already hundreds of succubus in the Golumba arena. Every succubus wanted to collect the essence of their lord, and there was a leader-level succubus lady boss above. If they did not seize the opportunity, they did not know when they would succeed. The demon army rushed into the skeleton fortress. In order to show off in front of Sauron, 3 Balrogs, an elite 6-armed Naga, an elite soul judgment demon, and an elite assassin demon all tried to kill the skeleton monarch in front of them. Demons were basically unreasonable, so under the siege of 8 legendary demons, the skeleton monarch did not even have a chance to fight with Sauron before it was killed by the assassin demon. Spirit summoning. Sauron stood up at this time, pushed away a large group of succubus that was a little annoying and headache, and personally extracted the soul, then said, "Destroy this place. Collect the scattered souls and take away all the soul crystals." P.S. Many people know that playing Undefeated Legend and getting Durex. Considering the fact that there are single people, I call today to suggest whether the officials can add the Rubik's Cup award. Chapter 10:19. With the end of the battle, the succubus began to count the spoils. As a smarter demon, the succubus was used by Sauron as part of the brain. As for the other demons, it was not that he didn't want to use them, but there were very few middle and low-grade demons with brains. As for the high-grade demons, they had other tasks. Most of the high-grade demons were not willing to accept this position. They liked to join the battle as a commander instead of counting the casualties of the cannon fodder. In contrast, the succubus, who liked to use their brains and sit on their own, was much more useful. They didn't like to fight head-on, but they liked to have some power. The statistics of the spoils and casualties came out. After Sauron captured this half-plane, he had obtained about 50,000 soul crystals and several warehouses of other rare resources. There were not many gold and gems because the undead didn't need them. However, the number of necromancy casting materials was huge. Sauron took half of these spoils, which was about 25,000 soul crystals. The rest of the soul crystals were to be rewarded to the demon soldiers. Otherwise, they would definitely not buy it next time. There were also unspoken rules in the abyss. In a plundering war launched by a demon lord, the demon lord's spoils could not exceed 70%. More than this number, the high-grade demons below would be dissatisfied. Of course, compared to other places, the demons were still relatively evil. Sauron took half of the soul crystals and spoils, and the other half was mainly given to the high-grade demons as rewards. However, after going through the Golumba arena, these things would eventually be returned to him. Master. A mature and beautiful succubus came to Sauron's side and threw a flirtatious glance. Then she said, "This time about 5,000 demons died. Most of them were berserk demons and Hezru demons. The first batch of spoils has been sent back by Sir Angad. These little bitches only knew how to seduce him all day long." Sauron ignored the flirtatious glance and nodded. "Very good. Let the secondary Baelor Caters continue to clean this half-plane and collect souls and spoils. I'll leave him a demon army of 10,000. In any large-scale battle, it would be strange if the demon casualties were less than 20%. The demons that died were basically brainless and liked to charge forward alone. For example, berserk demons and Hezru demons. These demons were too deeply infiltrated by chaos and had a high death rate in every battle. They were completely high-level cannon fodder. However, if they died, they died. These kinds of demons could be replenished very quickly. Sauron also needed to eliminate them in order to cultivate a demon army that would listen to his command. The first batch of demons began to return. However, there were still many places in the demi-plane that had not been cleaned up. Sauron left behind a secondary Baelor while he led the army back. This was a perfect plundering battle. To the demons, any plunder would be a perfect plunder as long as the casualties did not exceed 50% and they won. They would be happy and look forward to the next plunder and destruction. Bottomless Abyss, Third Layer, Forgotten Land. Just after returning to the Golumba arena, Sauron came to the abyssal blood pool. In the demi-plane of the undead, in addition to the soul crystals, there were also many souls imprisoned. These souls were thrown into the blood pool by Sauron. Soon the blood pool began to bubble. Then, new abyssal worms crawled out of the blood pool one after another. The mother of worms gradually approached. After Sauron occupied this place, the mother of worms, which was close to the strength of a demigod, had surrendered. It guarded against other demons from approaching and protected these abyssal worms until they became dretches. The souls of mortals could only be transformed into abyssal worms, and most of the soul crystals came from the dead professions. Sauron selected a batch of less powerful soul crystals and threw them into the blood pool. Then, some stronger abyssal worms crawled out. These abyssal worms would grow quickly and quickly evolve into demons. In the end, they would most likely transform into berserk demons and Vroks. 3 days later, collect all the demons here. After doing all this, Sauron said to the demon guard next to him, "No one else is allowed to come close. The transformed abyssal worms will be transported every 3 days." The blood pool was the core of the source of soldiers. The strength of any abyssal lord was measured by the number of blood pools they controlled. A blood pool would give birth to new demons every day. If one did not rely on the blood pool and only collected slaves from the wilderness, it was essentially the same as those night witches who herded abyssal worms and sold them. A demon lord who only needed to buy abyssal worms from night witches and ghosts would be looked down upon. Golumba Arena inside the fortress. Another batch of higher quality soul crystals appeared in Sauron's palm. These were the core of the undead steel, the souls from Styx and the servants of death. A small blood pool appeared in front of him. But unlike other blood pools, this one was directly connected to the magma pool next to it. Plop. Sauron threw a gray-black soul crystal into the blood pool, then bit his fingertip and injected a drop of blood into it. With the boiling bubbles, the figure of an abyssal worm quickly emerged, and then it changed into the appearance of a dretch. However, the form was not stable and it quickly continued to advance. Demon lords could use their power to directly promote low-grade demons. Just like Sorin's Slaughter EXP, demons needed soul energy to advance quickly. The form of the newborn demon gradually stabilized. If Sauron stopped, a middle-grade demon would be born. But what Sauron needed was not a middle-grade demon. He waved his hand and put the middle-grade demon that was about to take shape into the magma pool. Soon there was a painful scream. "Create fire demon." Sauron's blood was awakening the potential genes of the middle-grade demon in front of him. Through the magma pool, if successful, a fire demon would be born in the flames. However, it seemed that this time it failed because the demon in front of him quickly turned into charcoal. Another one failed. Sauron did not look frustrated but put another soul crystal into it. The transformation rate of a fire demon was much lower than that of other demons. Under normal circumstances, only 1 out of 3 promoted middle-grade demons could transform into a fire demon. Sauron transformed about 30 times a day, and on average he could transform about 10 fire demons a day. This transformation required at least a Baelor to complete. When the other Baelors grew up, Sauron could let them transform the fire demons. Soon the second soul was formed. The body of the demon transformed by the blood pool was very successful. At the moment when it was ignited by the magma pool, it did not make a painful cry, but roared excitedly. Then a fire demon burning with fire came out of the magma pool and knelt on one knee toward Sauron. "Master." Sauron nodded and said, "Take him down." A successful demon would lose most of its memories, but its instincts and a few memories would be retained. Any successfully transformed fire demon would have direct combat power. The whole transformation process continued. Sauron transformed more than 100 today, but the success rate was still about the same as before. Only 1 out of 3 successfully transformed into a fire demon, and they were basically all transformed by middle-grade soul crystals. The proportion of these fire demons that could be promoted was about 1/10. After many battles, less than 1/10 of the fire demons could be promoted to become fire demons. Sauron needed a bloody battle. Only a complete victory in a bloody battle could quickly produce a batch of flame demons. Night fell. Sauron returned to his palace, and groups of succubus maids were already waiting inside, looking at him expectantly, hoping to be favored. However, Sauron was not interested at all today. He still had a very important thing to do, which was to send a portion of the high-grade soul crystals back to the material plane. Mordor City needed these soul crystals to make diamond golems. Mordor City. Sauron was busy preparing for the production of the diamond golem factory, and today bad news was sent to him. The Falcon Kingdom was destroyed? Sauron frowned as he looked at the information in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Was it really completely conquered by the undead?" The south coast was under his protection, but other places were not so lucky. The Falcon Kingdom was located in the southwest of the continent. It was not a small kingdom, and there was a church of the noble goddess. The noble goddess, Sinwold, was a weak god. Her church was not strong, but it was not weak either. But now the whole kingdom had fallen, and the church of the noble goddess was almost wiped out. This was the first time the church of the gods had been hit so hard by the undead. At the same time, an evil name also spread in the material plane. Sazastan. The leader of the Red Robe Wizards, the evil demigod Lich, led the undead army to destroy the Falcon Kingdom and gathered a group of Red Robe Wizards to try to rebuild Tori's kingdom. Sauron pondered and murmured, "The Red Robe Wizards have also come out. Then the undead Oro should also make a move soon." The god of Lich seemed to have fallen after the undead Oro appeared. Then Sirik appeared. Because of the phylactery, the god of Lich was not so easy to kill. Even if the gods in the original book destroyed his body, the god of Lich would find a way to be reborn. Only Sauron, Sirik, and those who inherited the power of the 3 gods of death could directly kill the god of Lich. He was one of Sirik's targets, and the time of his fall was after the undead Oro appeared. "Looks like it's time to start." Sauron pondered for a moment, and then a little bit of divine light separated from his body, and then an identical Sauron appeared. P.S. By the way, on the 28th, which is tomorrow's beta test of Undefeated Legend, the Futo army is preparing to enter the Way Kingdom in the sun-chasing area. My sock puppet is still Futo. This time I want to see if I can really get the Rubik's Cup. This is a game that does not require experience to level up. My name is Futo. Chapter 10:20. Sauron was planning something. But while he was plotting something, the Queen of Spiders, who was far away in the Underdark, also began to move. The evil goddess began to tighten the giant net she had woven and gradually targeted the main god of the elves. The anger of revenge had been accumulating in her heart for a long time. She was so eager to take revenge on her former husband, the main god of the elves, Corlan Larishan. The Avatar Crisis was a stage. The first to appear on this stage was the human god system, because humans had the largest number and were most widely distributed in the world. But with the transition of the Avatar Crisis, the gods of other races began to gradually appear. Shortly after the outbreak of the undead, a god system that was not very rare in the material plane began to gradually appear. That was the dwarf god system. Dwarves were popular craftsmen, alchemists, and inventors. Although their technology was recognized, most dwarves still liked to live with their own kind in comfortable caves under the hills where animals were abundant. Dwarves liked animals, beautiful gems, and all kinds of jokes. They had a sense of humor and loved puns, jokes, games, and even pranks. The more complicated the design, the better. Fortunately, dwarves were as invested in craftsmanship as they were in pranks. Dwarves liked to ask questions and discover things through personal experience. Sometimes they were reckless. Curiosity made dwarves skilled engineers because they were always looking for new ways to build things. Sometimes, the gnomes would set up a prank just to see how the others would react. This was a group of naughty little guys. Many people would mistake them for halflings, but in fact, halflings were much taller than dwarves. Dwarves were only about 1 to 1 meter tall and weighed between 40 and 60 pounds. Their skin color was dark brown to wood brown, they had blonde hair, and their eyes were different shades of blue. Males liked carefully trimmed short beards. Dwarves usually wore clothes of animal skin or earth tones, with intricate embroidery or delicate jewelry. Dwarves reached adulthood at about 40 years old and could live up to 350 years old, but some could live up to 500 years old. This was a long-lived race. Because of their individual strength and height, dwarves did not often walk in many cities. They only liked to deal with dwarves and halflings, and they got along quite well. Only a small number of gnomes would leave the settlement and go to human cities, and these gnomes were often more dangerous. Because of some wars in the past, many humans had never seen a gnome in their entire lives. Only in the territories of dwarves and halflings would they encounter one. The dwarves didn't like the visit of humans, and the halflings had closed off the Shire. Therefore, since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, there was not much news about the dwarves. Gnomes lived in the wooded hills of the southeast. Although they lived underground, gnomes went out to breathe fresh air more often than dwarves and enjoyed outdoor activities. The dwarves hid their homes with ingenious architectural structures and illusions. Only welcomed visitors would be guided to the bright and warm caves, and those who were not welcomed would not be able to enter. They liked to use illusions to disguise their homes. The main god of the gnomes was Garzhanjan, a main god who grew slowly over time. His history was as long as the birth of the gnomes. Grey Feather Hills. This was one of the territories of the gnomes. They only occupied a small part of the material plane and did not leave their land much. However, these gnomes had escaped the first few Avatar crises, but after the outbreak of the undead disaster, they still suffered a lot of impact. But these were not the most important things. The more important thing was related to a god. He was Shiguzan, the great earth caller, gnome god of death and nature. As mentioned before, many of the clergies had long been divided, and the clergies of different races were given the power of some new gods. After a long time, the gnomes also had their own god of death, that was Shiguzan, the great earth caller. He lived on the edge of the underworld in the lower plane, and was responsible for assisting Klemvox in managing the dead, but he was mainly responsible for the souls of the gnomes. This was a god with mid-level divine power. Shiguzan, the great earth caller, mastered the clergies of earth, nature, and the dead. These were all very powerful clergies, and they also allowed him to successfully advance to mid-level divine power. At this moment, near a gnome village in the Grey Feather Hills, a dense crowd of undead surrounded the place. The gnomes did not have many big cities. They lived relatively scattered, and the temples of the gods were mostly at the level of temples. This village worshipped Shiguzan, the great earth caller, the gnome god of death and nature. In the darkness, a pair of unruly eyes watched everything. These resurrected undead surrounded the place. Unlike other undead, they were directly controlled by a powerful demigod lich. The power of death. Syrinx silently looked at the village in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Destroy this place. I want to seize the power in the temple." "Yes, master." The demigod lich nodded and retreated. Soon the undead launched a crazy attack. Without any support, the gnomes in front of them were defeated, and soon hundreds of them were killed. The fall of the entire village was only a matter of time. About half an hour later, this gnome village was sacrificed, and then all the gnomes were killed and resurrected as undead. Syric's figure appeared behind the undead. Compared to when he first broke out of the seal, he was much stronger. At least, he had the power of a weak divine power. He came to the temple of the village and then entered the temple alone. Soon, the brilliance of the temple gradually dimmed, and the power of death gradually disappeared, as if it was swallowed by some existence. There were only 2 temples in the whole village. One was dedicated to Bar Ivan, the Shadow Cloak, gnome god of spies, and the other was dedicated to Shiguzan, the Great Earthcaller, gnome god of death and nature. Master. Just as Sirik walked out of the temple, a hazy shadow appeared. This was a promoted assassin, and the most terrible assassin had the ability of permanent invisibility. They were promoted by the god who held the clergy of murder, and were endowed with the special ability of permanent invisibility. They were also once the core members of the Sirik Church. The assassin approached quietly, knelt down and said, "We have found traces of Bar Ivan, the Shadow Cloak. But we also found traces of Garrido, the Iron Hand, gnome god of war. They seem to have appeared together near the Grey Feather Hills for some reason." Sirik turned his head and laughed as if he was sneering. He said, "The gnome god of war? So the gnomes have a god of war. Continue to monitor their movements. When my power recovers a little, I will kill them all." According to normal thinking, Sirik's target should not be the gnome god system, but the human god system of death. However, Sirik held the clergy of conspiracy. He did not know why, when he targeted the human god system, he always had a kind of uneasiness, as if he had fallen into a conspiracy. In the end, he decided to follow the instinct of the clergy. Although Sirik was crazy, he was not an idiot. His intuition told him that if he targeted the human god system, he might fall into a conspiracy. Therefore, Sirik took advantage of this disaster of the undead and secretly controlled some liches to target an inconspicuous race. That was the gnomes who lived in the hills in the southeast. A divine system that was not very powerful, but had at least 3 or more gods as a target. More importantly, there was one more thing. So far, the gnome god Gar, Dazzling Gold, had not appeared. Sirik suspected that the gnome god was still in his kingdom and did not dare to come down. If the gods with great divine power were to resist desperately, they could hold on until the last wave of the Avatar crisis before they fell to the mortal world. However, doing so would consume more divine power. The harder they resisted, the weaker they would be when they fell to the mortal world. P.S. I still remember the ID photo update of a reader in Undefeated Legend last time. The game is in beta today. After I finish this chapter, I will enter the game to see if there is a similar ID this time. Chapter 10:21. Under the cover of the night. A camp was hidden in the mountains and a group of gloomy-looking magi were gathered here. They had special emblems on their chests and used various disguises to protect themselves. Their true identities were members of the Dragon Witch cult. It was an ancient and evil organization. Its founder was Samaster, a chosen of the goddess of magic. He had some dealings with Elminster and once fought with Alistair, the city lord of Silvery Moon. It was worth mentioning that the former city lord of Silvery Moon was his lover. This terrifying sorcerer eventually went crazy and revived as a lich. In order to destroy this terrifying existence, hundreds of priests of the god of dawn, the former god of light, tried to stop Samaster, but they were forced into a corner by the powerful Samaster. Helpless, the priests sacrificed their lives to pray for Luoshander to descend. The god of dawn responded to the prayers of his followers and sent his avatar to destroy Samaster. Samaster's all-out attack only managed to break the skin of Luoshander's temporary body, but his own body was destroyed by Luoshander's attack. An existence comparable to a demigod lich was thus erased by the former god of light. However, the organization he created was preserved and maintained its vitality. Because of this, the Dragon Witch cult and the Dragon cult were created. As time passed, the members of this cult gradually got closer to the god of liches and maintained some contact with Naruto. They were also the most terrifying part of the undead disaster, because their mission was to revive the Dragon Lich. An evil aura pervaded the mountain range. The members of the Dragon Witch cult worshipped dragons but not living ones. Instead, they were transformed into dragon liches after they died. Samaster had recorded the secrets of creating dragon liches in his book, The Tower of the Dragon. Now, copies of this book were circulated among the members of the Dragon Witch cult. Rituals usually involved the cooperation of the evil dragon and the sorcerers of the Dragon Witch cult. However, it was said that the more powerful sorcerers of the Dragon Witch cult would also force the evil dragon to undergo this transformation. At this moment, in the depths of the mountains, an old blue dragon had been placed in a large magic circle. The transformation of a dragon lich was a very complicated process. It required many magic tools and expensive items. After the transformation, the dragon lich would form a cooperative relationship with the members of the Dragon Witch cult. They would act together against the enemy. A hazy silhouette arrived. Soren's avatar appeared in the mountains. He sneaked past the traps and approached the Dragon Witch cult's camp. As expected, it has already begun. The initial attack of the undead calamity relied on a large number of creatures to wear down the living beings. However, the ghouls and skeleton soldiers alone were unable to truly threaten the gods. To ensure that his plan was perfect, apart from the undead lords, Naruto also secretly supported the members of the Dragon Witch cult. He sent his priests to join them, secretly teaching them necromancy spells and using them to resurrect the Dragon Lich and the Bone Dragon. This mountain range was the territory of the Blue Dragon. There weren't many dragons in the material plane, but there should be at least a few hundred of them. The Blue Dragons occupied this land because it was close to the Gobi Desert. There were more than 10 blue dragons gathered here because there was a gem mine here. The messy goblins were scattered around the perimeter. The old blue dragon controlled these goblins and used the bugbears as guards to protect the periphery of the nest. He then controlled them to mine the gems here. The aura of death gradually gathered. At the top of a mountain, an evil spell was taking effect. With a low chant, a member of the Dragon Witch cult in a black robe brought a strange potion to the blue dragon. It was a bottle of deadly poison. It would kill an adult dragon in no time. The moment the potion killed the dragon, the spell circle would automatically activate and the dragon's soul would be injected into the phylactery. The birth of a Dragon Lich was terrifying. This creature had a challenge rating of 23 and above. Even normal Baylor demons wouldn't be able to defeat it. Disciples, cheer. The Dragon Witch cult member who seemed to be the leader said excitedly, "Welcome back, our friend. The powerful Dragon Lich Durgos." As the blue dragon swallowed the potion, its life force quickly disappeared. Then the spell circle on the ground shone brightly. In Soren's vision, the soul of a dragon appeared and entered the phylactery. The power of death gathered. The blue dragon's body decayed at a speed visible to the naked eye and quickly turned into a half-skeletal dragon. Its flesh and blood dissipated with the spell, and the old blue dragon successfully turned into a Dragon Lich. A little bit of soul fire appeared in its huge eye sockets. It seems that they're very skilled at turning into a Dragon Lich. Soren silently watched all of this. At the same time, he calculated the strength of the last few waves of the undead calamity based on what he saw. The outbreak of the undead calamity was only the prelude. Currently, the resurrected were low-level undead and refugees who starved to death during the Avatar crisis. At most, they would be turned into skeleton warriors and ghouls. However, Naruto's goal was not these. As the first wave of the undead calamity ended, more powerful undead would gradually appear, and the Dragon Lich would be the most important one. Currently, there were many members of the Dragon Witch cult scattered throughout the material plane. They were either coercing or forcibly turning the dragons into Dragon Liches. Naruto's Grim Reaper's servants were assisting these people. Dragon Liches could not only be transformed from pure-blooded dragons. According to Soren's memories, Naruto taught the Dragon Witch cult other methods so that they could even transform mixed-blood dragons into Dragon Liches. For example, old pterosaurs, wyverns, white dragons, and so on. The members of the Dragon Witch cult were mainly distributed in the east and north. The eastern desert was occupied by the evil blue dragon, while the cold lands of the north had a large number of wyverns and white dragons. Nero's church controlled a group of necromancers, and after using the undead to attract attention at the beginning, they had already begun to quietly prepare to revive the giant dragon. The War of the Dragons should be starting soon. Soren watched the old blue dragon in front of him completely turn into a Dragon Lich. He had no intention of doing anything because this operation was not for a Dragon Lich. He was looking for the god of liches. The War of the Dragons broke out in the late stage of the undead disaster. The outbreak of the war was mainly related to the Dragon Witch cult. Many pure-blooded dragons, especially those of the good alignment, could not tolerate the other party's resurrection of the Dragon Liches and desecrated the long sleep of the dragons. So in the end, even the dragon islands of other worlds had dragons joining the battle. However, the main force of the whole battle was still the good gold dragons and silver dragons. Most of them lived near the Elven Kingdom. This battle finally attracted a legendary dragon. It was one of the 3 legendary dragon species, the Power Dragon. This legendary dragon fought with Naruto head-on and did not die. It only escaped with serious injuries. Soren waited quietly. According to the information he found, the god of liches had encountered the goddess of death and magic not long ago. His body was destroyed by this otherworldly god. Although he was resurrected with a new body, his strength must have been affected. According to the information collected by Mordor City, his core followers were here. The camp in front of him was a secret gathering place of the Dragon Witch cult. In his previous life, it was a large dungeon that had destroyed many people, and there was a certain chance of encountering the god of liches. Soren estimated that there was a 30% chance that the god of liches would appear here. There were about 3 dragon liches, 1 legendary necromancer, 2 legendary mages of the Dragon Witch cult, and more than 100 members of the Dragon Witch cult. The most powerful one was the blue dragon lich that had just turned, and the other 2 were old subspecies of dragons that had turned into liches. Just as Soren was secretly observing everything, a sudden movement attracted his attention. Then, in Soren's perception, a beautiful mature woman with long silver hair appeared outside the camp. She quietly lurked and approached here, as if she wanted to spy on the situation of the Dragon Lich's camp. This is her. Soren seemed to have thought of something, and the corner of his mouth could not help but show a playful smile. He did not expect to meet an acquaintance of his previous life here, and it was someone who had been chasing after him for a long time. The reason was that after Soren came out of the Underdark, he was a little short of money, so he went to her nest to steal some valuable things. The mature woman with long silver hair used magic to cover her tracks, and then quietly bypassed the bugbear goblin that was guarding the camp. She did not realize that Soren was secretly observing her. She just carefully approached because her current form was not suitable for fighting, at least she could not use all of her strength. This evil aura. The mature and charming woman secretly observed the camp, and as if she felt something she murmured, "It really is a dragon lich. These evil guys are actually making dragon liches. No. This matter must be reported to others." Faint clouds lingered. The woman with long silver hair in front of him quickly disappeared, and then gradually retreated outside the camp. However, at this time a cold voice suddenly sounded, "Since you are here, don't be in a hurry to leave. Am I right? Guess what I saw? A sneaky little silver dragon. How dare it lurk in our territory? A gloomy aura." A figure holding a white bone staff appeared, and looked at the woman in front of him with a playful gaze and said playfully, "Looks like we have one more material." This was the camp of the Dragon Witch cult. A large-scale battle with a challenge rating of around 25, where thousands of adventurers had fallen. Chapter 1022. Silver Dragon, Alexandrina. An adult dragon who lived near the Cloud Mountains. She had a group of maids made up of cloud giants. She liked to go to the human countries and was quite popular among the elves. In Soren's memory of his previous life, she was a mobile quest distributor in the middle of the Avatar crisis. As long as one was in the good camp, it was always easy to receive a variety of quests from her. Because this naughty silver dragon was a member of a hidden organization in the material plane, the Harpist. The Harpist was a very loose secret and contradictory organization. Its leaders were unknown and its internal composition was very complicated. They were always hidden in the shadows, only at the critical point of the situation, and immediately disappeared into the crowd after completing the task. They fought against evil in some seemingly insignificant and even somewhat deviant ways, but the general good people did not understand them. Some people claim that we are spies and others think that we are nosy dangerous people or unquestioning assassins. In fact, we are the collection of every characteristic of these people, if the situation proves that it is appropriate to do so. Non-evil people of any age, profession or race could become a harpist: humans, half-elves, elves, some halflings, dwarves and highly intelligent forest dwellers, such as forest fairies and centaurs. The first 3 accounted for the majority of the harpist. Most of these people were bards or rangers. Other professions also had a place, whether it was mages, thieves or priests. Droll was an ally of the harpist, but many priests were proud to be a harpist. This was a very old organization whose history could be traced back to before the last Avatar crisis. The Harpist had existed as early as the time when the 3 gods of death were active. The Harpist was once called the interference of the material plane, and deranged idealists, but in most cases they were a group of people who acted with good intentions. Alexandrina was one of the leaders of the Southern Harpist. She was keen to fight against evil forces and liked to release a variety of quests to adventurers. Soren once dared to steal some valuable things from her lair, and because of this he was on the Harpist's wanted list. This organization had weakened a lot, but it still had a lot of influence. Jejia. A black mist appeared, and with the fluctuation of magic, a lich holding a silver-gray staff appeared in front of him. He looked at the silver dragon in front of him and said in a deep voice, "What did I see?" Silver Dragon Alexandrina. Why didn't you obediently stay in the Cloud Mountain range? Why did you come here to die? The high-ranking members of the Dragon Witch cult appeared one after another. They looked at Alexandrina with ill intentions. Evil Dragon Witch disciples. Being surrounded by so many fallen wizards, Silver Dragon Alexandrina's face did not look good. She said in a serious tone, "You actually dare to secretly resurrect a Dracolic. Other kind people would never allow such behavior." The harpist never lacked a sense of justice. Soren complained as he hid in the dark. As a member of the Grey Zone, he had suffered many losses from harpers in the past. But now that he was a god of the evil camp, those harpers did not dare to trouble him. However, these energetic fellows seemed to have set their sights on the Dragon Witch cult, which was a good thing. As long as the harpist knew about it, the goddess of the forest and ranger, Mei Li Kai, would not sit idly by. Of course. The premise was that the silver dragon in front of him could leave alive. Bone prison. Dimensional lock. Greater disjunction. The members of the Dragon Witch cult in front of him chose to argue with the silver dragon with a strong sense of justice or kill her and turn her into an undead. The battle was going in a very unfavorable direction from the beginning. The legendary wizards of the Dragon Witch cult sealed the space and then used disjunction to destroy the spells and items on the silver dragon. This was a very smart tactic because most of the silver dragons were very rich. When they turned into human form, they would prepare a lot of magic items for themselves. A dull roar was heard. Alexandrina decisively turned into her original form in the face of this unfavorable situation. The combat power of adult dragons decreased greatly when they turned into human form. Although the silver dragon could retain a lot of spellcasting abilities, she was definitely not a match for these people in front of her. A silver dragon about 15 meters long appeared in front of everyone. She had very beautiful silver-white scales as if they were one. The width of her wings was much wider than other dragons. There was a special divine glow on her body, which meant that Alexandrina was blessed by a god. Dragon's breath. Facing the siege of the members of the Dragon Witch cult, the silver dragon Alexandrina chose the most effective tactic at the beginning of the battle. She took a deep breath at the beginning, followed by a dragon's breath, then launched a wing attack at the nearest target. There were not many creatures in the material plane that could compete with the power of adult dragons. Even the silver dragon, who was not known for her strength, was able to suppress the members of the Dragon Witch cult in an instant. However, this suppression could not last long because there was a limit to the number of times she could use her dragon's breath. Screams of agony rang out. Under the counterattack of the silver dragon Alexandrina, the members of the Dragon Witch cult were quickly killed. However, as soon as the dragon's breath ended, a counterattack followed. Accompanied by a spray of blood, a Dracolic rushed over and tore apart Alexandrina's beautiful scales, taking away a large piece of flesh. The wizards of the Dragon Witch cult immediately began to cast spells such as weaken, damage increase, and reduce resistance to continuously weaken Alexandrina's strength. Soren stood still in the dark and did not seem to have any intention of making a move. This silver dragon did not have any relationship with her, so Soren had to think carefully about whether it was worth it to expose himself in advance for her sake. However, at this moment, an evil aura appeared, accompanied by some kind of divine power that made Soren tremble. A strange item suddenly appeared in the hands of the Dracolic in front of him, and the next moment, a black flame appeared on the Dracolic's palm. This vicious flame instantly burned Alexandrina's body, causing her flesh to gradually wither and her dragon scales to shatter like fragile glass. At this time, Soren noticed that the Dracolic was wearing a crown under his cloak. This crown contained divine power and some kind of divine power that came from the same source as Soren's. This is? Soren's expression changed instantly and he murmured, "This is the aura of the King of the Dead, Mirko? P.S. The monthly ticket is about to expire. If you want, please vote again. Wait a minute." Chapter 1023. Part of Soren's power came from the three gods of death. Therefore he was very sensitive to the power of these three powerful evil gods. Almost as soon as they used some kind of evil black fire, he had a very strong feeling. What is this power? Soren frowned and stared at the member of the Dragon Witch cult in front of him. Under the terrible black fire, the silver dragon, Alexandrina's life force was rapidly weakening. It was as if the fire directly ignited her life and kept burning her life force. This power came from the former king of the dead, Mirko. It was a kind of fire from the god of death and had a terrible lethality to any creature, just like the famous silver fire of the goddess of magic. Soren seemed to have thought of something and said in surprise, "The horned crown. Crown off horns?" There was no doubt about it. Mirko of the three gods of death had definitely fallen. He died very early, and his divinity had long been inherited by someone else. Most of his power should have dissipated. Then, under the circumstances that he had already fallen, what else could exert his divine power? A divine artifact. And it must be a high-grade divine artifact. A divine artifact that disappeared from the material plane appeared in Soren's memory. It was a divine artifact that was obtained by a legendary figure and brought out of the material plane. The horned crown. This was a divine artifact that preserved part of the divinity and intelligence of the King of Bones, he might be able to comprehend the divinity of death, Mirko. It was a silver headband with a black diamond embedded Soren disappeared. For sharp bone he did not intend to save the silver dragon, and the inside of the diamond shone with a strange light. He was determined to get this divine crown was an evil item with self-consciousness. Its only purpose in existence was to constantly spread evil and pain. The silver dragon Alexandrina's injuries were getting worse and worse, a long time ago when he still had divine at any time. Although it was finally broken into pieces by the black staff, a young silver dragon flew at the top of the cloud mountains. Alexandrina felt that death was midnight. Later, this made her feel very unwilling. He used his dying power to pass through the heavy defense around the tower of the black scepter, and gods had answered her prayer of the horned crown, because everything around her seemed to have stopped. Then he poured his remaining divinity into it, and teleported away. Suddenly appeared. For a long time, it seemed that in an instant, the Dracula controlled people to invade and destroy the terrible church and its believers. This was a power that mortals could not imagine the allies of Kale. She had never seen anything that could kill a Dracula so easily. This divine artifact preserved part of the arrival of the goddess of the forest. It contained the mysteries of death, and Alexandrina felt an even more negative energy of evil aura. It could kill mortals directly through space, but it could also endlessly erode the lives of divine slashes in an instant. This divine artifact is still preserved. It was said that before Mirko died, layers of protective magic shattered divinity and power into it. Soren waved a silver white stream of light and pierced into the Lich's body. At the moment of destroying the Lich's body, a powerful divine power crossed space and destroyed the Lich's phylactery with death. It seemed that only a second had passed. When Alexandrina's consciousness gradually returned, all the enemies in front of her had become cold corpses. And in front of this silver dragon, there was a terrible thin figure. Even just standing there casually, she could not help but feel her soul trembling. Evil god. A very terrible evil god. Although the other party didn't even look at her from the beginning to the end, Alexandrina felt suffocated and didn't even dare to move. Soren did not pay attention to Alexandrina behind him. He gently waved his hand, and a crown flew out from the wreckage of the Lich in front of him. At the moment when it fell into his hand, the crown trembled violently as if it was struggling, and there was some kind of strange scream. But all its struggles were in vain. Soren easily suppressed its power. Horned crown. It was a high-grade artifact created by Mirko. It could grant the following abilities, has the same effect as the Lich's aura of fear. When resisting necromancy spells and magic effects, has 25 magic resistance. Has the same effect as a level 6 priest's ability to repel or command undead creatures. If you already have this ability can be stacked with your priest's level. Can cast unmistakable teleportation once a day, only limited to teleporting the wearer and his equipment. Can be cast once every 10 minutes, the range of influence is 40 feet cone. All creatures within the cone-shaped area must pass a toughness check of difficulty 20. Otherwise they will immediately die, and after 1d4 rounds, they will become bound spirits under the control of the crowns. If they pass the check, they will only receive 3d6 plus 20 damage. This is the instant death effect of necromancy. Mirko's hand. Once a day the wearer can cover one of his hands with black flames. Using these flames will be treated as a touch spell. When the wearer successfully uses a melee attack to hit the target must pass a toughness check of difficulty 25, or they will die immediately and become a spirit under the control of the wearer after 1d4 rounds. It was a high-grade artifact in the truest sense. It was a very terrifying item in itself. Mirko had injected the power of death into it. In addition to the terrible black flames, there was also a death aura that could be cast once every 10 minutes. Any creature that was killed would become a bound spirit. This was an artifact that could easily create an army of undead creatures. However, this high-grade artifact also had a curse that affected anyone who wore it. The wearer's alignment will immediately change to neutral evil. Unless Mirko agrees, the wearer cannot take off the crown. The only way to remove the crown is to wait for it to teleport away. The horned crown can cast suggestion on the wearer once a day, controlling the wearer's consciousness. The wearer will gradually become an undead creature under the 2-year-long curse. Every time the death aura and Mirko's hand are used, the process will be accelerated for 1 to 4 months. When the transformation is complete, the wearer's appearance and creature type will become an undead creature, but he will still retain his normal abilities. If the horned crown leaves the wearer who has become an undead creature, the wearer will die immediately. The wearer will become very suspicious and will try his best to protect and keep the horned crown so that no one can take it away. When the horned crown is worn, all creatures within 100 feet of the crown must pass a willpower check, or they will be affected by the resonance spell. Mirko's remaining consciousness screamed in horror. He felt Soren's power and tried to escape, but there was no way. He had been suppressed by Soren's divine power. So this is the horned crown? Soren looked at the crown in front of him and said to himself, its ability is similar to the one ring that I made. He created 7 rings in the bottomless abyss. All of them were lesser divine artifacts and high-grade legendary items. They were also enchanted with suggestion and control spells. The effect was similar to the horned crown, but they did not have such powerful enchantments. Soren took a deep breath, then closed his eyes and felt some kind of power. He murmured, "Death." The remaining power of the divinity of death. It seems that I really have to thank you, Mirko. Then you can completely die now. P.S. Second update. The monthly ticket will expire in 6 hours. Those who have a monthly ticket can vote. Chapter 1024. The silver dragon, Alexandrina, stood rooted to the ground, not daring to move an inch. However, after suppressing Mirko's consciousness, Soren turned his head and looked at her. Then he frowned and said, "What are you doing here? Are you going to have a long talk with these members of the Dragon Witch cult?" At the same time, as Alexandrina swallowed her for the priesthood of sorcerers, she also held the priesthood of prophecy. It seemed like the evil god in this divine had no ill intentions. Soren had already otherwise she wouldn't have survived until now. Gloria herself was a master of immediately got up and now that she had extracted the power from the artifact, she immediately advanced. The silver dragon Alexandrina had become a demigod her wings and soared into the sky. I think I saw something. Then flew out of the mountains. Gloria turned and stood up when she heard and shook his head. She seemed a little tired toward the camp of the dragon. The domain of the gods is too vast. Since he had already made his move, he had to eliminate the root of the problem. The priesthood of prophecy was merging into Gloria's body. Otherwise, it would easily alert the other gods. Any prophecy spells. The dragons that he once had to look up to were now easily killed. This priesthood of prophecy was very difficult to master. Soren felt that the world had become smaller. As a mortal who had just advanced, the entire battle encountered a problem that was even more troublesome than fallen during the Avatar crisis. It was even harder for her to control this power began to surpass that of mortals. Don't be hasty. Not to mention that Soren was an intermediate god. In front of him and said slowly, if they wanted to kill Soren, all the members of the Dragon Witch cult accumulate more divinity and divine persona, and they only had a 30% chance of winning. Used to this power. This was just a camp of the Dragon Witch cult. For now, put aside the matter of the arcane tower, there were only a few high-grade members. I'll use this time to teach you how to adapt to the power of the spoils of war. Whether it was Soren obtained more than 5 million, they did not have the help of some legendary items. Soren could quickly adapt to the priesthood, he also but there was still a period of rejection to extract the dragon crystal from the dragon's bodies. Gloria was in the same situation now. Method that could easily allow the gods of the dragon system, but she could not control it herself. The dragon's soul Soren had to help her stabilize her mind. Motor City. This process could take up to a month. Arcane tower. Fortunately, Gloria did not inherit too much power, or she would have to spend a long time in seclusion like Vivian accompanied by a silver-white radiance. A little bit of divine power was extracted from it and gradually merged into Gloria's body. The structure of the it was as if he had reached a critical point. I seemed to have sensed the location of the goddess of magic fluttered in the wind. She's in the southwest of this world, and the scepter of something had happened to the god of light. When Soren obtained the scepter gradually dimmed, part of the divine light on Gloria's body had been integrated into it. Gloria seemed to have received some of the power of the priesthood of mages, and a trace of the law so that her perception of the gods had gradually merged into her body. The goddess of magic is in the boundaries of space. Soren Gloria's eyes turned silver white. Try not to use the prophecy ability for now. Soren suddenly until you've completely absorbed the power of the scepter. He stood behind Gloria and become a lesser god. Then try to access the weave to obtain the priesthood of mages. Savras was the god of prophecy. Soren had entered the realm of the gods. Whether it was for herself or to accompany Soren, she had to gradually step into the realm of the gods. In the study, 2 Soren appeared here, but soon the other one gradually disappeared. A strange crown appeared in Soren's palm. He reached out and touched the crown in front of him, feeling it tremble. Then, a golden light of divinity appeared in his eyes, and in the next moment, a powerful domain of divinity enveloped the space. A majestic divine power rushed into the crown. The remnant soul of the former god of death, Mirko, let out a sharp scream, but it was mercilessly suppressed by Soren's powerful killing intent. The remnant soul of a god who had been dead for a long time could not stop him. As the divinity was extracted, some data appeared in front of his eyes. Discovered the divinity of death. Extracting energy. You have extracted the divinity of the high-grade divine item, Horned Crown. You have obtained 10 divinity points. You have obtained 5 divinity points. Domain of Death upgraded. You have obtained the information of the Priesthood of Death. Ability upgraded. Your Domain of Death upgraded to the Priesthood of Death. The third notification of the Priesthood of Death appeared. When Soren had completely extracted the divinity of the Horned Crown, his Domain of Death became the Priesthood of Death. However, although he had the Priesthood of Death because this newly acquired ability was very weak, Soren did not extend a new divinity ability. The main reason was that the power of death was still in the hands of Clemvox and Naruto. The acquisition of this priesthood only meant that he could gain followers of death and let the fanatics visit the domain of death. The light of divinity dissipated. As Soren extracted the power of the Horned Crown, this high-grade divine item quickly became an ordinary item. Soren played with the divine item in front of him and murmured, "Although the power of divinity is gone, but its characteristics are very good. Divine creation. Create high-grade magic items. Change form." With the golden light of divinity, the Horned Crown turned into a melted liquid in the palm of Soren's hand. Then he injected a little of his divinity into it, and soon the divine item was reshaped by him. 7 strange rings appeared in front of his eyes. Soren melted the core gem and injected it into the last ring. Then he used suggestion, control, and the power of divinity bit by bit. The characteristics of the Horned Crown were very similar to the one ring created by Soren, and it had the effect of psychological suggestion and mind control. Now he remade 7 rings with the Horned Crown and kept the last one as a controller to make a new divine item. Different from the one ring made in the past, this time the one ring was injected with the power of the Priesthood of Death by Soren. These rings would give the wearer a powerful blessing, but also because of the Horned Crown, the one ring would erode the wearer's body. Finally, the wearer of the one ring would be transformed into the undead after death, and it would be a more advanced binding spirit endowed with the power of death. The Horned Crown itself has a binding spirit. Soren thought about it and extracted a little divinity from between his eyebrows. Then he said, "In this case, directly use the one ring as the medium to create a high-grade ring spirit." A little divinity was injected into the one ring. The original power of the Horned Crown was strengthened again. Soren gave up the original advantage of numbers and concentrated the power of death. When the first owner of these rings died, a powerful ring spirit would appear. The divine item was gradually completed. Soren finally left his own inscription on the one ring, and then put them all away. The one ring was completed. However, it still needed to be considered who to give it to because the ability of the first owner affected the power of the ring spirit. The bottomless abyss. The third layer. The forgotten land. In the depths of the hot lava, the figure of the Baylor leader, Sauron, appeared. Behind him were teams of fire demons. Compared to the previous time, the number of fire demons had increased a lot, and the number of fire demons had increased to 8. Under Sauron's gaze, these fire demons entered the lava one by one. Then he cut open his palm and injected a little bit of the Baylor's blood essence. This could help the fire demons obtain a medium to upgrade. When the accumulated demonic power was strong enough, these fire demons would have the opportunity to evolve and become new fire demons at any time. Sauron looked down at the lava pool in front of him and murmured, "It's almost time to prepare for a bloody battle." You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.